"Who let this beggar in?" Richard Whitmore shouted, then slammed his pen down on the conference table. "Get security up here." The sharp impact echoed across the room. The silver pen cap rolled once across the polished tabletop, then stopped near the edge. Annie Carter flinched. For one moment, she clutched the red-stamped file tightly against her chest, as if it were the only thing keeping her on her feet. Her cleaning uniform was still dusted with grime from the service hallway below. Her natural hair, slightly tousled from the wind outside and the heat of the cramped elevator, framed a face burning with embarrassment. "I'm not a beggar," Annie said. Her voice was small, but clear. "Mr. Ellis, the security guard downstairs, has a bad leg. He said you needed this file urgently, so I only brought it up to help him." A few people around the long table exchanged glances. Richard Whitmore leaned back in his chair and studied the young woman standing in the middle of the conference room as if she were a stain that had just appeared on an expensive carpet. In front of him lay a $900 million contract, waiting only for the final signature. Richard let out a contemptuous laugh. "So now the cleaning staff also provides courier service," he said. "Wonderful. I suppose that's what we pay Harrington and Vale for." Annie swallowed hard. "Sir, I only wanted to help Mr. Ellis." "Then help him by staying on the floor you are paid to clean." Richard tapped 2 fingers against the table, then pointed to the empty space beside his leather briefcase. "Put it there. Then get out of my conference room." Annie stepped closer to the table. She placed the file exactly where Richard had pointed. On the cover was a bold red stamp, "Final signing, copy urgent." She was about to let go, turn around, and leave the room as quickly as she could. But at that moment, her eyes accidentally fell on the contract lying open in front of Richard. Page 8. A financial chart took up most of the page. The columns were perfectly straight. The percentages were neatly aligned. Beneath the chart was a blank space that appeared to contain nothing. But something was wrong. The spacing was off. The final line was slightly heavier. On the paper, there was a faint gray mark, very light, in a place where no printed text should have been. Annie stood still. Richard noticed immediately. His lips tightened. "Why are you still standing there?" Annie blinked, but her eyes remained fixed on the page. That page, Martin Graves, Caldwell's attorney, sat across the table and gave her a thin smile. "This is a private acquisition agreement, young lady. It is not a lunch menu." The remark made several members of Caldwell's team laugh. Victor Caldwell, seated opposite Richard, slowly lifted his coffee cup. His face held a calm look touched with amusement. "Let her speak, Martin. I'm curious to know what this young woman found between the trash bins and the elevator." Richard laughed along with him, a short, smug sound. "Perhaps she can advise us on both mop handles and corporate merger law at the same time." Laughter moved around the table again. Eleanor Price, Richard's legal advisor, was the only one who did not laugh. She only watched Annie, her brows slightly drawn together. It was unclear whether the look meant irritation or a sudden flash of concern. Annie's cheeks burned. "I should go," she whispered. "Yes," Richard said. "You should have gone a long time ago." But Annie's feet did not move. She looked back at page 8. The bottom margin, the right corner, the blank space beneath the chart. A faint line almost disappeared into the paper. It might have been nothing. It might have been only a printing error. Or it might have been a blade wrapped in white paper. Richard's patience ran out completely. He frowned, his voice turning sharp. "Are you still standing there? I told you to leave." Annie did not answer right away. Richard looked around the table, as if his own irritation had become entertainment. "Perhaps this little beggar needs a written invitation to leave. Eleanor? Should we draft one for her? 3 copies? Initialed on every page?" A few people laughed again, mostly because Richard had laughed first. Martin Graves leaned back in his chair. "Make sure it is written in simple language. We don't want to overwhelm her." Richard smiled with satisfaction. "Good idea. Short sentences, large print." Annie lifted her head. This time, she did not look at Martin. She looked straight at Richard. "You should look at it yourself," she said. "Page 8, bottom right corner, directly under the chart." Richard's smile vanished. "What did you just say?" "Page 8, Annie repeated. "Bottom right corner, under the chart." Eleanor Price shifted slightly in her chair. Her patience was clearly wearing thin, but the certainty in her eyes was no longer as firm as it had been. "Miss Carter, step away from the table." Martin Graves let out a dry laugh. Young lady, this is a contract worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Our legal team reviewed it 3 times. Annie answered at once. Then you reviewed it with your eyes on a screen, not from a hot printer copy. Richard slowly turned his head toward her. A hot printer? The laser printer downstairs, Annie said. The one that printed this copy. It runs very hot. Hot enough to reveal details that do not show clearly on a screen. Martin's smile stiffened. That is absurd. No, Annie said. What's absurd is hiding a line of white text under a chart and hoping everyone only reads the PDF. Eleanor stood up. White text? Annie pointed toward the page, though she still did not touch it. Here. This space looks empty at first glance. But when the paper passes through the printer's heat, the ink and pressure leave a very faint trace. It is not black. It is gray. My mother once showed me how hidden text can appear after printing if someone uses the right formatting and material. Richard scoffed. Your mother? She used to be a legal secretary. Oh, well then, Richard said, spreading his arms and looking around the room with mockery. Stop the signing immediately. The janitor's mother once did office work. Laughter rose again, but this time, it did not travel far. Victor Caldwell had stopped laughing. Martin Graves had gone silent as well. Eleanor Price had begun moving around Richard's chair. Annie stepped a little closer to the table. She placed one slender finger near the bottom right corner of page 8. Richard shot up from his chair. Take your hand off it. Annie did not pull back. You can throw me out of here, she said, looking straight into his eyes. Tomorrow, you will still be an arrogant billionaire. But if you sign that line, No one laughed anymore. Eleanor stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. Show me. Annie gently tilted the page toward the ceiling light. Here, under the chart. It says strategic assumption of subsidiary obligations. It sounds harmless until you read the hidden definition behind it. It expands the subsidiary's obligations to include overdue loans, pending lawsuits, debt from foreign subsidiaries, and personal guarantee exposure after the transaction closes. Richard suddenly turned toward Victor Caldwell. What is this? Caldwell gave a strained smile. It was the kind of smile a man uses when he needs 3 seconds to build a lie. Richard, this is just a misunderstanding. A cleaning girl cannot analyze a document of this scale. Annie spoke before Richard could respond. I didn't analyze the whole contract. I only read the trap. Martin Graves pushed his chair back slightly. That is a dramatic choice of words. No, Annie said. It is an accurate one. Eleanor bent over the page. Her reading glasses slipped low on the bridge of her nose. She looked once. Then a second time. Then she shook her head slightly. I don't see anything. Annie reached out and pulled the contract farther under the conference room light. Tilt the paper up. Don't look straight down at it. Look from the left edge. Eleanor hesitated. Richard did not. He snatched the glasses from Eleanor's hand and lowered his face closer to the page. For the first few seconds he said nothing. His lips pressed together. His eyes narrowed. Then the color slowly drained from his face. The line was there, faint, gray against white, almost shy beneath the chart. But it truly existed. Strategic assumption of subsidiary obligations. Richard read on. Overdue loans, pending claims, debt from foreign subsidiaries, personal guarantee exposure. His hand froze on the table, the same hand that had slammed the pen down in front of Annie only minutes earlier. Eleanor leaned closer again. This time, she saw it too. Richard. Martin Graves sprang to his feet. It is only a formatting error, nothing more. Annie turned the page just enough to reveal the reference mark. A formatting error does not lead to Schedule 8F. Eleanor immediately flipped to the end of the document. Her fingers moved quickly across the pages, faster and faster. Then she found the schedule. Her face went pale. Richard lowered his glass onto the table. The pen he had slammed down only minutes before lay near his hand, close enough to remind everyone that he had almost signed the contract. Richard remained motionless, holding the glasses in his hand, the contract tilted beneath the conference room lights. He stared at it as if, by not blinking, the faint gray words might disappear on their own, and everything could return to the smooth signing ceremony it had been arranged to be. But the words were still there, and Schedule 8F at the back of the document was still there too, waiting silently like a locked drawer someone had finally opened. Victor Caldwell was the first to recover. He let out a soft laugh, but it was too small, too dry, and too out of place in the frozen atmosphere of the room. Richard, Don't turn this signing ceremony into a farce, Caldwell said. Clearly, this is only a misunderstanding. Richard looked straight at him. A misunderstanding? Yes. Caldwell smoothed his tie with one hand. A printing error, a leftover formatting issue, or whatever your people want to call it. But we cannot allow the words of a little beggar girl to ruin months of work. Annie's shoulders tightened at once. Richard's voice lowered. You heard what she said. I heard a cleaning girl repeating a few legal terms she does not understand. Caldwell replied. And I heard this entire room begin treating it like serious analysis. Annie turned to look at him. I already told you. I did not analyze the whole contract. I only read the trap. Martin Graves quickly stepped in, perhaps realizing that Caldwell had shown too much irritation. Miss Carter, you are making accusations in a private business meeting. Words like that can have serious consequences. Richard immediately turned sharply toward Martin. Careful. Martin raised both hands, trying to appear calm. I am only protecting the integrity of the signing, Mr. Whitmore. This room is full of experts, lawyers from both sides, drafts that have been prepared, revised, marked up, and reviewed for compliance over many months. We cannot allow an unauthorized person to walk in, point at one page, and destroy the entire process. Eleanor Price was still bent over Schedule 8F. She was silent in the familiar way lawyers become silent when they are no longer arguing, but calculating damage. Eleanor, Richard called. She did not look up. Give me a minute. Caldwell leaned forward slightly. His voice softened, becoming smoother, as if he were speaking to an old friend over dinner rather than to a man he had almost tricked into signing a dangerous agreement. Richard, you and I both know how rooms like this work. Pressure creates confusion. A young woman walks in, clearly out of place, makes a dramatic claim, and suddenly everyone starts seeing ghosts on paper. Annie glanced back at the contract. That ghost has a cross-reference. Martin's jaw tightened. Enough. No. Eleanor said. She slowly straightened, holding Schedule 8F in her hand. Not enough. Not even close. Richard took a step toward her. What did you find? Eleanor placed the schedule beside page 8. The hidden line refers to subsidiary obligations. Schedule 8. F lists liabilities belonging to foreign subsidiaries under 3 holding entities, 2 in the Cayman Islands, 1 in Luxembourg. These amounts are not listed as direct debt in the main agreement. They are incorporated by reference. Richard's face hardened. How much? Eleanor checked the numbers again. On paper, the potential exposure exceeds $600 million. With the pending claims included, it could be even higher. A banker at the far end of the room muttered. That cannot be right. Eleanor's voice sharpened. Stopping this signing was absolutely right. Caldwell rose to his feet. This is ridiculous. Richard turned to him. What's ridiculous is hiding $600 million under a chart. Hiding? Caldwell repeated. That is a dangerous accusation. So is personal guarantee exposure. Martin pointed toward Annie, though he did not fully turn to face her. This is exactly the problem. We are using the language of a girl who was never supposed to be in this room. Annie let out a very soft breath. There was a bitterness in her voice that had been held back for too long. You say that as if the truth needs an access badge. A few people lowered their heads. An assistant half closed his laptop, then opened it again, as if he could not decide which choice looked less terrible. Richard did not defend Annie immediately, but he no longer looked at her the way he had before. Eleanor walked toward the large screen, opened the digital copy. A young lawyer sitting nearby hurriedly worked on his laptop. Yes, ma'am. Page 8, Eleanor said. Zoom in under the chart. The contract appeared on the screen. Clean. Normal. No gray line. No warning. Only an empty white space. Caldwell spread his hands. There, your reviewed document. Annie said. Select all the text. The young lawyer stopped and looked at Eleanor. Do it, Eleanor said. He dragged the cursor across the page. At first, nothing changed. Then a thin blue selection box appeared beneath the chart, exactly where Annie had pointed. Silence immediately filled the room, a silence so heavy that even the sound of the air conditioner became clearer. Copy it into a blank document, Annie said. The lawyer did as she told him. A moment later, the black text appeared on the screen. The strategic assumption of subsidiary obligations shall include all disclosed and undisclosed liabilities of foreign subsidiaries, listed or incorporated by reference under Schedule 8F, including overdue debt instruments, pending claims, conversion obligations, and personal guarantee exposure arising upon executive certification at closing. No one laughed anymore. Richard read the sentence once, then he read it again. The second time, he took longer. Eleanor turned to Martin. Was this language in the revision we received last Thursday? Martin answered a little more slowly than he should have. I would need to check. You prepared the final signing copy, Eleanor said. Check your memory first. Caldwell interrupted. Eleanor, this tone is not helping. Neither is fraud. Martin's face tightened. I strongly object to that word. We are not in court, Eleanor replied. Not yet. Richard placed Eleanor's glasses on the table. He looked at Caldwell. In that moment, all the business lunches, charity events, golf weekends, polite emails, and carefully calculated handshakes seemed to fall away. Victor, Richard said, did you know this line was in the copy I was about to sign? Caldwell adjusted his cuff. I know our attorneys worked with yours on a series of complex obligations. That was not my question. That is the only answer I can give before a closer review. Richard stepped closer. You were going to let me sign it. The softness on Caldwell's face disappeared for a moment. You are a very sophisticated man, Richard. You have counsel, you have lenders. You had every opportunity to read the document. Annie spoke quietly, but every word carried across the room. He did read it. He just couldn't read what you deliberately hid. Martin turned to her. Miss Carter, I advise you to stop speaking. Richard looked at Martin. You should not advise her on anything. I advise everyone in this room to remember that she accessed a confidential document. She brought me the final signing copy I requested, Richard said. She touched the agreement. She stopped me from signing it. Annie looked at Richard. For the first time, he had said the truth without trying to cover it. Caldwell noticed it too, and his expression changed. His voice softened again. Richard, let us take a 1-hour break. My team will compare drafts with Eleanor. We will remove any language that causes concern. No harm has been done. No harm? Richard asked. The signing has not taken place. The issue has been found. That is exactly what review is for. Annie almost spoke, but Eleanor spoke first. Review is not supposed to mean discovering a hidden white text clause 10 minutes before signing. Caldwell's eyes shifted to Annie. And yet here we are because an untrained cleaning woman thinks she understands what better people missed. Annie did not step back. Better people? Caldwell smiled faintly. In this room? Yes. Richard looked at Caldwell, then at Annie's worn jacket, her old shoes, and the gray mark still clinging to her fingertip. A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. Eleanor closed the signing binder. This meeting is paused. All copies stay here. Digital access is frozen until my team completes a version comparison. Martin shook his head. You cannot lock us out of our own access. I can suspend execution on behalf of my client, Eleanor said, and I just did. Caldwell buttoned his suit jacket. Richard, be careful. Deals collapse much faster from panic than from clumsy language. Richard pushed the pen farther away from the signature line. Then it is fortunate I did not sign those clumsy words. Caldwell's mouth tightened. You may regret embarrassing a longtime associate over a maid's guess. Annie said, it was not a guess. Caldwell looked at her. You had better hope this attention is worth what comes next. Before Annie could answer, the conference room door opened. Sam Ellis stepped inside, one hand gripping his cane, his breathing heavier than he wanted anyone to notice. His injured leg made each step slow, but his eyes immediately swept the room. Annie standing beside the table, Richard pale, Caldwell angry, and the signing binder closed. What happened? Sam asked. Annie said, Page 8. Sam looked at her, then gave a tired little nod. Your mother always hated Page 8. No one understood the joke except Annie, but it helped steady her. Richard turned to Sam. You told her to bring the file up here. Yes, sir. Why didn't you bring it yourself? Sam tapped the tip of his cane once against the carpet. My leg had other plans. Caldwell let out a cold breath. This is unbelievable. Sam looked at him. Most true things are when you don't plan for them. Eleanor began giving instructions to her staff. Collect every binder. Photograph page 8 under angled light. Preserve any residue on Annie's fingertips if possible. Have it archive the PDF metadata. I want every draft downloaded within the hour. Annie looked down at her hand. My fingers? Eleanor's voice softened slightly. That gray mark may matter. Richard heard that and looked again at the fingers he had wanted removed from the table only minutes earlier. Caldwell moved toward the door, Martin close beside him. As he passed Annie, he lowered his voice. Smart girls should know when silence pays better. Annie's stomach tightened, but Sam was standing beside her. She answered softly, "My mother died because silence used to be cheaper. If Annie's words moved you, please like this video. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from, because every voice matters here. And if you believe in truth, courage, and justice for the people no one listens to, please subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories." Caldwell looked directly into her eyes for 1 second. Then he left. Richard remained by the table, his hand near the pen. His face looked older than it had 20 minutes earlier. "Miss Carter," he said. Annie turned back. He seemed to be searching for something to say that would not cost him an apology. "Stay nearby." Annie looked at him, then at the closed signing binder. "I still have a floor to finish." Eleanor almost smiled. "Almost." Sam gently touched Annie's elbow. "Come on." Annie walked out with him, leaving the suffocating glass-walled room behind. In the hallway, the air was a little easier to breathe, though her hands were still shaking. Inside the conference room, Richard Whitmore bent down to look at page 8 again. The elevator doors closed before Annie let herself breathe. For 2 floors, neither she nor Sam said a word. The numbers above the door moved down one by one, slow enough to make every second feel like a question. Annie kept her hands tucked against her jacket, but the faint gray mark on her finger would not let her forget the room, the table, the pen, or the way Richard Whitmore's face had changed when the hidden words appeared. Sam leaned against the elevator wall, trying to hide the pain in his leg. He was not good at hiding much from her. His mouth tightened every time the elevator shifted. "You shouldn't have come up," Annie said. Sam gave her a side glance. "You shouldn't have gone quiet." "I almost did." "I know." The elevator dropped past 35. Annie looked at the steel doors. Her reflection came back dull and bent in the metal. Old denim jacket, tired eyes, hair loosened by the wind, a cleaning badge hanging from her collar. She had spent months moving through this building after office hours, wiping fingerprints from glass doors, emptying trash cans under desks that cost more than her monthly rent, picking up coffee cups left beside marked-up legal drafts. No one upstairs had ever needed to know her name. Now they knew it because she had put her finger on a page. Sam shifted his cane. "Your mama would have had a field day with that room." Annie gave a small breath that almost became a laugh. "She would have told me not to touch the paper. She would have touched it first." That time Annie did laugh, but it broke too soon. The elevator opened on the service level. Warm air from the hallway met them, carrying the smell of floor cleaner, old paper, coffee left too long on a burner, and wet wool from coats hanging near the security desk. It was a different world from the 42nd floor. No leather chairs, no city view, no one speaking in numbers large enough to buy neighborhoods. Sam lowered himself into the chair behind the desk. "Go sit a minute. I have the East Hall to finish." "June's got the East Hall. Mrs. Walker already covered the bathrooms for me yesterday, and she'll cover a hallway today because the good Lord gave her 2 working knees and a mouth that scares supervisors." Sam pointed with his cane toward the small break room. "Sit, Annie." She went because he had climbed 42 floors for her, and refusing felt unkind. The break room had one vending machine, a microwave with a cracked handle, a table with 3 mismatched chairs, and a corkboard crowded with old notices. Annie sat with her back to the wall. Only then did she open her hand. The gray mark was still there. She rubbed around it, careful not to touch the center. Eleanor Price had said it might matter. Evidence, maybe. That was what rich people called marks when they appeared in the right room. Down here, a mark was usually dirt, ink, or proof you had been working. Annie reached into the inside pocket of her denim jacket and pulled out her mother's notebook. The cover was black once, but the corners had softened and peeled. A rubber band held it closed because the spine had given up last winter. On the first page, written in blue ink, were the words Martha Carter had said so often that Annie could hear them without reading. "Don't just read what they want you to read. Read what they hope you'll skip." Annie ran her thumb beneath the line, stopping before the gray mark could touch the paper. Her mother had written like she cooked, careful, practical, with no wasted motion. Martha Carter had never had a corner office or a name on a door. At the little legal office on South Cottage Grove, she had sat near the copier, answered phones, scheduled appointments, filed motions, typed letters for attorneys who sometimes forgot to say thank you, but when a contract came in with a strange clause or a client cried over a paper they did not understand, those same attorneys would drift toward Martha's desk. "Martha," they would say, holding out pages. "Can you take a quick look?" A quick look never meant quick. It meant they needed her eyes and did not want to admit it. At home, after long bus rides and late dinners, Martha brought that habit to the kitchen table. She would spread papers beside a chipped bowl of tomato soup or a plate of macaroni and cheese, then tap the page with the back of her pen. "Annie, what do you see?" "Words." Lazy answer. "Small words." "Better. Now." "Why are they small?" "Because they don't want people to read them." Martha would smile then, tired but proud. "Now you're awake." Their apartment had always smelled like laundry soap, old books, and whatever dinner could be stretched for 2 nights. On Fridays, if the paycheck allowed, Martha bought fried chicken from the grocery counter and made Annie read the receipt before they ate. "Receipt too?" Annie had groaned once. "Especially the receipt. A person who can cheat you for $1 can cheat you for a house." Back then, Annie thought her mother was being dramatic. Later, she learned Martha was being gentle. The first hospital bill came with 6 pages and a pale blue envelope. The second came with 12. The insurance letter came with phrases Annie still hated. Excluded service, prior condition, policy limitation, review completed. Martha read the letter 3 times at the kitchen table. Not because she did not understand it, because she did. "They found their little door," Martha said. "What door?" "The one they built in case I got sick enough to cost them money." Annie had been 15 then, old enough to know fear, too young to know how to carry it. She watched her mother circle a sentence near the bottom of page 4. The ink shook a little in Martha's hand, but her voice stayed calm. "See this? This is where they hid the no." For months after that, the apartment filled with paper. Appeal forms, denial letters, payment plans, clinic notices, charity care applications. Martha kept teaching even when her person, eat every breath expensive. "If you don't understand a word, circle it," she told Annie from the couch. "What if the whole page is words I don't understand? Then circle the whole page and make somebody explain it." One night, after a long shift and a longer bus ride, Martha opened the black notebook and wrote a sentence while Annie washed 2 cups in the sink. "Justice isn't always fair, baby. Sometimes it's just the first honest person brave enough to speak." Annie had read it later, after the funeral, when the apartment was half packed and the landlord had already started using a softer voice. The one people use when they are about to do something hard and legal. A knock at the break room door pulled her back. Mrs. June Walker stood there with a foam cup of coffee and a look that could cut through a locked office. She was in her 50s, with gray threaded through her braids and reading glasses on a chain over her uniform. "Sam said you were in here," June said. Annie closed the notebook halfway. "I'm fine." That's what women say when they're deciding whether to fall apart on their own time." June set the coffee down. "Drink. I don't want to get you behind. Baby, I've been behind since 1998. Drink." Annie wrapped both hands around the cup, leaving the marked finger lifted. The coffee was too hot and too weak, which meant it was exactly from the security desk. June nodded toward the notebook. "Your mama's?" Annie nodded. "She taught you that thing upstairs?" "She taught me to look where people don't want to waste time." June pulled out the chair across from her. "That man really call you a beggar?" Annie looked down. June's jaw set. "Of course he did. Men like that can see a missing comma in a billion-dollar clause, but not a whole person standing in front of them. He looked scared at the end. Good. Fear is the first honest feeling some folks ever have." Annie almost smiled. Then her face tightened. "They're going to make it about me." June did not pretend not to understand. "They already started? The lawyer kept saying I shouldn't have been in the room. Caldwell said they can't rely on a little beggar girl. Like the page changed because I pointed at it." June leaned back. "When people can't beat what you said, they start beating who you are." The words settled beside Martha's in Annie's mind. From outside the break room came the sound of phones ringing harder than usual. Shoes moved quickly down the service hall. Somewhere above them, a signing ceremony had turned into something else. Annie knew enough about powerful men to understand they did not forgive embarrassment easily. She opened the notebook again and found a page near the middle. Martha had drawn a box around 4 words. Paper remembers. People deny. Annie stared at that line until the letters blurred. June's voice softened. You did right. I don't know what I did. You read. Annie gave a tired laugh. That's all? June stood, taking the empty sugar packets from the table because she could not pass trash without cleaning it. Sometimes that's the whole war. When June left, Annie sat alone with the coffee cooling between her hands. She thought of Richard Whitmore's pen, Victor Caldwell's smile, Martin Graves telling her to stop speaking. Then she thought of her mother at the kitchen table, tapping a page with the back of a pen and asking the only question that had ever mattered. What do you see? Annie looked down at the gray mark on her finger. For years, she had believed her mother left her a notebook because there was nothing else to leave. No house, no savings, no ring worth selling, just paper and lessons. Now, for the first time, Annie wondered if Martha had left her something sharper than money. Upstairs, Richard Whitmore's people were probably tearing through drafts, schedules, and emails. Caldwell's people were probably choosing which lies would sound cleanest. By morning, someone would decide whether Annie was a witness, a problem, or a name to erase. She closed the notebook and slipped it back inside her jacket. Then she stood, picked up the mop bucket waiting by the wall, and returned to the hallway. The floor still needed cleaning. The building still expected her to bend down, but Annie Carter no longer felt quite as small when she did. By the time Annie finished the east hallway, the 42nd floor had stopped pretending it was hosting a signing. The first sign came through the service elevator. 2 junior attorneys stepped out carrying boxes of printed drafts, both speaking too fast, their ties loosened, their phones pressed between shoulder and ear. One of them nearly bumped into Annie's mop bucket and muttered sorry without looking at her. The other looked at the gray mark on her finger, then at her face, then quickly away. Annie kept mopping. That was what people like her did when powerful people panicked. They kept the floors dry, emptied the trash, changed the liners, wiped away fingerprints from doors that led into rooms where other people decided the shape of the world. Upstairs, Richard Whitmore stood at the head of the conference table with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the wrist. The ceremonial folders had been replaced by open laptops, marked drafts, yellow legal pads, and 3 separate printed copies of page 8, placed under different lamps. Eleanor Price had taken control of the room with the calm anger of a woman who had just realized someone had tried to make her look careless. Version history, she said. A junior attorney answered from the screen. We have the draft from last Thursday, the revised draft from Monday, and the final signing PDF received at 6:12 this morning. Compare page 8 across all 3. Already running? No, not just software. Print them. Same printer, different printer, black and white, color, and hard copy from the closing binder. Richard looked at her. You think there are more? I think people who hide one sentence rarely stop at one. Victor Caldwell had left with Martin Graves, but his presence had not left the room. It sat in the closed leather folders, in the 2 clean PDF, in the uneasy faces of the bankers who had all been ready to congratulate themselves 20 minutes earlier. Richard picked up the copy Annie had touched. The hidden line looked weaker now until he angled it beneath the light. Then it appeared again, patient and damning. How did 11 lawyers miss it? He asked. Eleanor did not soften the answer. Because we reviewed the digital clean copy. We compared red lines. We trusted the markup. We did not print every exhibit and read it under a light from the side. Richard's mouth tightened, and she did. She noticed something wrong with the paper. She cleans floors. Eleanor looked at him over her glasses. Apparently, she also reads better than most people in this room did today. No one spoke after that. The junior attorney at the screen cleared his throat. Miss Price? What? The hidden text is not in Thursday's draft. It appears in the final PDF. The text box is set to white. Font size 6. It sits behind the chart layer. Who sent the final PDF? Caldwell's counsel. Martin Graves copied you, Mr. Whitmore, and the closing list. Eleanor held out her hand. Show me metadata. The attorney clicked. Lines of file information filled the screen. Modified this morning. Author field blank. Editing software stripped, but one temporary tag remained in the embedded layer. MG, final, 8F. Eleanor's face went still. Richard saw it. Martin Graves. It would be hard for him to call that a lunch menu, she said. A banker near the end of the table said, if this gets out before we understand it, The market reaction could be severe. Richard turned on him. If I had signed it, the reaction would have been worse. The banker closed his mouth. Eleanor flipped to Schedule 8F again. Look at the names of these entities. Caldwell Baltic Medical Finance, Caldwell Rhine Holdings, Caldwell Astor Overseas. Each one carries debt, claims, or convertible obligations. None of that was in the summary memo. Our people didn't flag them? Richard asked. They were referenced as dormant affiliates, with no material operating exposure. Eleanor tapped the page. That phrase should have made someone sweat. Richard walked to the window. Chicago had become a field of gray and white beyond the glass. He could see nothing clearly out there, which suited the moment. For 30 years, he had built a reputation on reading rooms, reading men, reading risk. That evening, a young woman in a denim jacket had walked in with a delivery file and read the only thing that mattered. He remembered her first words after he insulted her. I'm not a beggar. Not please. Not excuse me. Not I'm sorry. I'm not a beggar. Richard closed his eyes. And for the first time all day, the contract was not the only document before him. He saw her shoes wetting the carpet, her hand shaking but not moving away from the page. The way she had looked at him when she said he might be sitting beside her on the sidewalk. He opened his eyes. Find her. Eleanor looked up. Now? Yes. She may still be in the building. Richard turned toward the door. Then bring her up. Eleanor held his gaze for a second. Richard, if you intend to offer her money so you can feel less ashamed, don't. That landed harder than he liked. He gave her a cold look, but Eleanor had worked for him too long to be moved by it. I need to ask her what else she saw, he said, and you need to apologize. Richard's jaw set. I know what I need to do. No, Eleanor said. You know what you need from her. That is not the same thing. The room became very quiet again. Richard picked up his suit jacket and walked out without answering. Downstairs, Annie was rinsing the mop head in the utility sink when her supervisor, Mr. Kellerman, appeared in the doorway with a phone in his hand, and anxiety pinched into his forehead. Annie. She turned off the water. Yes, sir? You were upstairs? Her stomach tightened. I brought a file. Mr. Whitmore is asking for you. June Walker, who had been restocking paper towels from a cart, looked over sharply. Asking how? I don't know, June. I just got the call. Annie dried her hands slowly, careful around the gray mark. Am I fired? Kellerman looked uncomfortable. Nobody said that. That's not an answer. No, he said, softer. Not fired. They just want you upstairs. June stepped between them a little. She doesn't go anywhere alone. Kellerman sighed. June. No, I said what I said. Before he could respond, Sam came down the hallway with his cane, moving slower now but with his shoulders squared. I'll take her. Annie looked at him. Mr. Sam, your leg. My leg has had a full evening of opinions. It can have one more. They rode up together. This time the elevator felt smaller. Annie watched the numbers climb and wiped her palms on her jacket, then stopped herself. Evidence. Eleanor had said the mark might matter. When the doors opened on 42, the hallway was busy. People who had ignored her an hour ago now stepped aside. Not warmly, not kindly, but carefully, as if she were carrying something breakable. Richard was waiting outside the conference room. Without the table between them, he looked less like a headline and more like a tired man trying not to show it. Miss Carter, he said. Annie noticed the name this time. Miss Carter. Not beggar. Not cleaning girl. Sam stood beside her, silent. Richard looked at the gray mark on her finger, then at her face. We confirmed part of what you said. Only part? Eleanor came to the doorway behind him, enough to suspend the signing. Annie nodded once. Then you don't need me. Richard inhaled. I need to know how you saw it. I told you. The paper was wrong. That's not enough. It was enough when I pointed at it. Eleanor almost smiled. Richard glanced back at the conference room, where his people were still tearing through the deal. When he turned to Annie again, the pride in his face had not vanished, but it had lost some of its shine. I was wrong to speak to you the way I did. The hallway stilled around them. Even people pretending to work heard it. Annie did not rush to rescue him from the silence. Richard continued, each word costing him more than the last. You came up here because I asked for a document. I saw your clothes, your job, and your race before I saw you. That was on me. Sam's hand tightened around his cane. Annie's throat moved, but she held her voice steady. You said I'd stain your deal. Richard looked down. Yes. I didn't stain it. No, he said. You showed me where it was already dirty. For the first time, Annie looked into his face and saw more than fear. She saw shame, fresh and unfamiliar, like a man wearing a suit that did not fit. Eleanor stepped in gently. Annie, we need to preserve your finger transfer, if you'll allow it. Then I'd like you to walk me through exactly what you noticed. Not for him, for the record. Annie looked at Sam. He gave her a small nod. Your call. Inside the conference room, Richard's pen still lay beside the unsigned signature tab. Caldwell's empty chair waited across the table. Page 8 sat under a lamp. Annie looked at the page, then at Richard. I'll show Miss Price, she said, but I'm not staying to be laughed at again. Richard did not defend the room. He only stepped aside. No one laughs, he said. Annie walked past him into the room, her old sneakers quiet on the carpet. This time, nobody joked about housekeeping. This time, when she reached the table, every lawyer leaned in to hear what the girl from the service floor had seen. Annie did not sit at the conference table. Eleanor Price offered her a chair twice, first with a hand gesture, then with a softer, please, Annie. Both times Annie stayed standing beside the lamp with her mother's notebook tucked inside her jacket and Sam near the door like a quiet witness. I can explain it faster from here, she said. Richard stood at the far end of the table, not in his usual seat. Maybe he had noticed she did not want him sitting above her. Maybe Eleanor had. Either way, no one told Annie where to stand now, and that alone made the room feel different. Eleanor placed 3 printed versions of page 8 side by side. Show me exactly what caught your eye. Annie pointed to the blank area under the chart, the bottom spacing. It's too heavy. One of the young attorneys leaned closer. Too heavy how? Annie glanced at him. He had been one of the people who laughed earlier. His face had the careful look of a man trying to act as if he had not. Paper has rhythm, Annie said. When a page is clean, your eye moves through it without stopping. But this part pulled, like there was something underneath. The attorney frowned. That's not a legal standard. No, Annie said. It's a reading habit. Eleanor gave the attorney a look that ended his next sentence before it left his mouth. Go on. Annie turned the first copy. This is the one from downstairs. The heat made the hidden lines show faintly. This one from your office printer is cleaner. This third one from the PDF looks empty. Unless you select the text. That means someone designed the digital copy to pass review. Richard's mouth tightened. Someone. Eleanor heard the anger in that single word. We prove before we accuse. You saw the metadata. I saw a tag that points toward Martin Graves. That is not the same as a complete record. Annie looked from one to the other. If he hid this line, there may be more than one. Eleanor nodded. That is what I'm afraid of. For the next 40 minutes, Annie walked Eleanor through what she noticed. Not legal theories, not deal structure, just what her eyes caught. A page number that looked too close to the margin. A chart title aligned 1 point lower than the others. A footnote marker with no visible footnote. A schedule reference tucked beside a comma instead of a clause number. Small things. Things people skipped when coffee was cold, deadlines were close, and everyone in the room believed the expensive lawyers had already done the reading. Richard listened without interrupting. That was new. At one point, a banker whispered to another, "We need to know whether the closing can be salvaged." Annie heard it. So did Richard. He turned. The closing was almost a coffin. Stop talking about salvaging it. The banker went silent. Eleanor closed the folder at last. Annie, I need your finger photographed before the transfer fades. After that, you can go. Annie looked at the gray mark. Photographed? It may help establish contact with the printed hidden text. Richard stepped forward. We can compensate you for your time. Sam's cane tapped once against the carpet. Annie looked at Richard. No. He stopped. No? I'm still on the clock downstairs. If you want to pay someone for my time, pay the cleaning company so they don't dock me. Richard's face worked through confusion, then embarrassment. Of course. And pay Mrs. Walker if she covered my haul. Eleanor looked down, hiding a small smile behind a cough. Richard nodded. Done. Annie extended her hand to Eleanor, not Richard. Eleanor called a paralegal, who photographed the gray mark under a desk lamp, then sealed a cotton swab in a small evidence sleeve. The whole thing made Annie feel strange. Her hands had cleaned bathrooms, carried trash, scrubbed gum from tile. No one had ever treated them like they held proof of anything. When it was finished, she stepped back. "Can I leave now?" Richard looked at her as if he wanted to say 5 things and trusted none of them. "Yes," Eleanor said for him. "Thank you, Annie." Annie picked up her cleaning badge from where it had twisted against her jacket. "You're welcome, Miss Price." She and Sam left the room together. This time the hallway did not feel easier. It felt watched. Assistants moved aside. A few people offered polite nods. Too late, and too careful. Annie did not return them. She had no energy left for making other people feel forgiven. In the elevator, Sam leaned both hands on his cane. "You held yourself well," he said. "I wanted to shake." "You did shake." She gave him a tired look. He shrugged. "Holding yourself well doesn't mean pretending your knees are made of steel. It means standing anyway." Downstairs, June had finished the East Hall and half of the lobby. She saw Annie and walked straight over. "You still employed?" "So far. Good. I was ready to become unpleasant." Sam snorted. "Ready?" June ignored him and handed Annie a wrapped sandwich from the break room refrigerator. "Eat." "I'm not hungry." "Eat nervous then." Annie took it because arguing with June took more strength than she had. Her shift ended after midnight. Outside, Chicago was still cold enough to make breath visible. Sam insisted on waiting with her near the service entrance until the late bus came. "You don't have to," Annie said. "I know." His coat collar was turned up, his bad legs stiff in the cold. Across the street, office lights burned in the tower like rows of sleepless eyes. Annie unwrapped the sandwich and took one bite. Turkey, mustard, too much lettuce. It tasted like something made by a person who expected her to make it through the night. "Mr. Sam?" "Ma'am, what happens now?" He looked toward the upper floors. "Now, rich men call lawyers. Lawyers call other lawyers. Everybody says, review, until somebody finds a cleaner word for fear. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I've got. The bus was late." A taxi pulled up near the curb, then drove away when no one in a suit came out. Annie watched the taillights fade into the snow. "I don't want them using my name," she said. Sam nodded slowly. "They might try. I didn't ask for any of this." "No, you carried a folder. I should have just put it down." Sam turned to her. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Punish yourself for seeing." Annie looked away. Sam's voice lowered. "Your mama didn't raise you to walk past a knife on the floor and hope the next person had good shoes." That landed where he meant it to. The bus finally came, sighing at the curb. Annie stepped up, then looked back. Sam lifted 2 fingers in a small goodnight. She found a seat near the middle, pressed her shoulder against the cold window, and watched Harrington and Vale slide away behind her. By the time she reached her rented room on the south side, her phone had 3 missed calls from an unknown number and 1 text from Mrs. Walker. "Don't answer strangers tonight. Sleep first." Annie locked the door, set her mother's notebook on the small table, and sat on the edge of the bed without turning on the lamp. Her room was narrow, with a radiator that knocked when it felt like working and a ceiling stain shaped like a map no one would want to follow. On the chair lay her GED workbook, open to a math section she had planned to finish before work. She looked at the notebook. For a long time, she did not touch it. Then she opened to the first page and read her mother's handwriting again. "Read what they hope you'll skip." Annie thought about Richard Whitmore, about the way his voice had changed when he said her name. She thought about Caldwell's smooth warning near the door. Clever girls should learn when silence pays better. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. She let it ring until it stopped. Then another text came, this time from Sam. "You did right. Lock your door. Call me if anything feels off." Annie typed back, "I'm okay." She erased it. Then she typed, "I'm scared." She almost erased that too, but her thumb hit send before pride could stop her. A minute later, Sam replied, "Scared means you understand the size of it. Brave means you'll sleep anyway." Annie placed the phone face down, took off her denim jacket, and folded it over the chair. The gray mark on her finger had faded, but not completely. Up on the 42nd floor, they were probably still reading. Richard's lawyers would search for more hidden lines. Caldwell's lawyers would search for a way out. Men with clean hands would decide what to call the dirty thing they had found. Annie turned off the light and lay down, but sleep did not come quickly, because somewhere in that contract, on page 8, a door had opened, and Annie knew enough about doors in legal papers to know they rarely led to only one room. By morning, Annie's name had already traveled farther than she had. It moved through security desks, legal offices, elevators, text messages, and whispered guesses over paper cups of coffee. Some people said she had saved Whitmore Global. Some said she had embarrassed Richard Whitmore in front of a major partner. Others had no idea what happened, only that the signing had been stopped, and the girl from the cleaning crew was the reason. Annie heard the whispers before she reached the service entrance. 2 paralegals stood near the revolving doors, coats still buttoned, voices low. "She's the one?" "I think so. She found it just by looking." "That's what they're saying." Annie kept walking. Her denim jacket was dry now but still creased from the night before. Her hair was tied back tighter than usual. In her pocket, her mother's notebook pressed against her ribs with every step. She had slept maybe 2 hours, and even that sleep had come in pieces. Full of conference lights, gray ink, and Caldwell's voice telling her silence paid better. At the security desk, Sam looked up from his monitor. He had shaved, polished his shoes, and put on his tie straight, though his eyes showed he had not slept much either. "You came," he said. "I work here." "Not what I meant." Annie set her bag under the desk where she always left it during her shift. "Did they say anything?" Sam nodded toward the lobby. "They're gathering people at 9. "For what?" "Mr. Whitmore called it himself." Annie's stomach tightened. "Called what?" Before Sam could answer, Mrs. June Walker came through the side hall carrying a stack of clean rags. "A public apology, if that man has sense. A public performance, if he doesn't." Annie looked toward the elevators. "I don't want to stand up there while people look at me." June lowered the rags onto the counter. "Baby, they already looked yesterday. Today they can listen." At 5 minutes to 9, the lobby began to fill. Lawyers came down from the upper floors. Assistants stood near the marble pillars with phones in hand but uncertain whether recording would be welcome. Security guards gathered near the front desk. Members of Richard's team stepped out of the elevators in dark suits. Even a few night cleaners stayed past their shift, arms folded, faces guarded. Annie remained beside Sam at the edge of the room, half hidden by the security desk. Richard Whitmore came down last. He wore the same navy suit from the day before, but he looked less arranged. No bright tie. No prepared smile. Eleanor Price walked beside him with a folder under one arm, her expression steady. Richard stopped at the center of the lobby, not on the raised reception platform, not behind a podium, just on the floor where everyone else stood. The room quieted. Richard looked once toward Annie. She did not move closer. He cleared his throat. "Yesterday afternoon, in a conference room on the 42nd floor, a young woman entered carrying a file I had requested. She did not interrupt my meeting for attention. She did not come to ask me for anything. She came because Mr. Samuel Ellis, a guard in this building, was in pain and could not bring the file himself." Sam's jaw tightened, but he kept his eyes forward. Richard continued. "I saw her clothes. I saw the work badge on her jacket. I saw her race before I saw her purpose. And before I knew her name, I called her a beggar." No one shifted now. Even the people who had not been in the room seemed to feel the word land on the floor. Richard turned fully toward Annie. "Her name is Annie Carter." Annie felt every eye move to her. But this time Richard did not let the room linger there. "Say it correctly," he said. "Remember it correctly." Because Annie Carter saw a hidden clause on page 8 of a $900 million agreement that my own team missed, my outside counsel missed, and I was seconds away from signing. Eleanor's face did not change, though one of the younger attorneys behind her looked down at his shoes. Richard took a breath. "I humiliated her. Some of you laughed. Some of you stayed quiet. Silence helped me think I had the right to keep going. I did not." A phone lowered near the back of the lobby. Richard looked at Sam next. "Mr. Ellis, you did your job yesterday better than I did mine. You trusted the right person. I owe you an apology, as well. Sam nodded once. Accept it if it comes with better chairs at the desk. A small, nervous laugh moved through the lobby. Even Richard's mouth twitched for half a second. It will, Richard said. And medical support for your leg. Paid by Whitmore Global. Not deducted from anything. Not buried in paperwork. Sam's expression softened, but only a little. Put it in writing. I already did. Eleanor lifted the folder. June whispered beside Annie. Well, I'll be. Richard turned back to the room. From this point forward, no employee, contractor, guard, cleaner, clerk, assistant, or visitor in any Whitmore-managed space is to be treated as invisible because their name is not on a door. I failed that standard yesterday. You all watched me fail it. I expect you to remember that before you copy it. The lobby stayed quiet. Then he stepped toward Annie. Annie wanted to move back, but June's hand touched her elbow, light and brief. Richard stopped a few feet away, leaving space between them. Miss Carter, he said, lower now, but still loud enough for the room to hear. I am sorry. For the word I used. For the way I spoke to you. For making a room full of people feel safe laughing at you. And for needing your help before I was willing to see your dignity. Annie's throat tightened. She had imagined, during those 2 broken hours of sleep, that an apology from a man like Richard Whitmore would feel like victory. It did not. It felt heavy. It felt late. It felt like standing beside a wound, while someone finally admitted he had made it. She nodded once. I hear you. Richard seemed to understand that this was not the same as forgiveness. Thank you, he said. Then Eleanor stepped forward. Annie, if you're willing, I'd like you upstairs at 10. Paid time, not cleaning time. Document review time. A low murmur moved through the lobby. Annie looked at her. I'm not a lawyer. No, Eleanor said. You're the reason we still have something for the lawyers to review. Richard added. This is not charity. Annie's eyes cut to him. It better not be. He accepted that. Temporary consulting assignment. Written terms. Hourly pay. You can refuse. June leaned near Annie's ear. Don't refuse good money just to punish his pride. Annie almost smiled. Sam said, read the terms first. That time, more people laughed, and the sound did not feel cruel. Annie looked at Eleanor. I'll read it. Good answer, Eleanor said. The gathering broke slowly. People did not rush back to work the way they usually did after an announcement. Some approached Sam to shake his hand. A few came near Annie, then thought better of it when June's face warned them not to arrive with soft guilt and empty phrases. One young attorney, the same one who had made the housekeeping joke, stopped several feet away. Miss Carter, he said, stiff with shame. I laughed yesterday. I shouldn't have. Annie looked at him for a moment. No. You shouldn't have. He nodded. I'm sorry. She did not make it easier for him. Okay. He left with his face red. June watched him go. That's how apologies should feel. Uncomfortable. At 10, Eleanor brought Annie to a smaller conference room on the 36th floor, not the glass room from yesterday. On the table sat a short written agreement. 4 pages, large print, plain language. Annie read every line. The pay rate made her blink, but she kept her face still. She circled one phrase. What does as needed mean? She asked. Eleanor smiled. It means I was lazy. We'll change it to a fixed schedule, unless you approve extra hours. Annie looked up. Then I'll sign. Richard stood near the window but said nothing. When Annie picked up the pen, he watched her hand more carefully than he had watched his own the day before. She signed her name slowly. Annie Carter. Not the cleaning girl, not the beggar, not the interruption. Anama in ink. Eleanor slid the first stack of documents toward her. Start with Schedule 8, F. Annie opened her mother's notebook beside the contract, not to show off, not for drama, but because that was how she read when the paper mattered. Richard saw the worn cover. Is that hers? Annie did not look up. My mother's. What was her name? Martha Carter. He repeated it quietly, as if the name itself deserved care. Martha Carter. Annie turned the first page of the schedule. If you want to honor her, Mr. Whitmore, don't say her name nicely. Read what she taught me to read. For once, Richard did exactly as he was told. By noon, Annie had read Schedule 8F twice and eaten nothing but half a pack of crackers from June Walker's purse. The conference room on the 36th floor had no grand view, only a narrow window facing the side of another building. Eleanor Price had chosen it on purpose. No ceremony, no long table built to intimidate. Just 4 chairs, a printer, a speakerphone, and stacks of paper that smelled faintly of toner. Annie sat with her mother's notebook open beside her and a pencil in her hand. She had refused a tablet. I read better on paper, she told Eleanor. Eleanor did not argue. So do I. That small agreement did more than either of them said. Across the table, 2 young attorneys worked through draft comparisons. One of them, Mark Delaney, kept glancing at Annie's notes as if expecting them to be mine. They were not. Annie wrote in tight lines. Page number 1st, issue 2nd, question 3rd. No decoration, no wasted words. Richard came in just after lunch with his tie loosened and a phone in his hand. Anything? Eleanor held up one finger without looking up. Let her finish. Richard stopped near the door. Yesterday, he would have spoken over the room until everyone moved faster. Today, he put the phone away and waited. Annie turned a page. This company here, she said, tapping the 3rd schedule. Caldwell Astor Overseas. Mark leaned in. What about it? It appears again on page 42 as Astor Overseas Holdings. No Caldwell in the name. That happens, Mark said. Short form reference. Annie looked at him. Then why does the address change? He blinked. What? She slid the 2 pages across. Here it's listed in Luxembourg. Here it's listed through a registered office in the Cayman Islands. Same director. Different debt note. Same maturity date. Eleanor pulled the pages toward her. Mark, check the entity list. Mark opened his laptop, his fingers moving faster now. Give me a second. Annie did not wait. She turned another page. There's also a currency problem. Richard stepped closer. Currency? This table says the debt is in euros. She pointed. But the footnote says all amounts are converted from US dollars using the previous quarter exchange rate. If that's true, this number shouldn't end in around 5 million. Converted debt almost never lands that clean. Eleanor's eyes sharpened. Mark? Mark was already typing. She's right. The euro figure should be different. Either the table is rounded without saying so, or the number was copied from another schedule. Annie shook her head. Not copied. Planted. The room went quiet. Richard looked at her. Why? Because round numbers calm people down, Annie said. My mother used to say a clean number is sometimes a dirty number wearing church shoes. Eleanor gave a short laugh before she could stop herself. I would have liked your mother. Annie's face softened for half a second. Most people did after they stopped underestimating her. Mark cleared his throat. The director name matches across both Astor entities. Thomas Greer. Annie wrote the name in her notebook. Who is that? Eleanor frowned. Registered agent, maybe. Outside counsel? I don't know yet. Richard looked at the name as if it had already cost him money. Find out. Mark nodded. On it. For the next 2 hours, the room settled into a rhythm. Eleanor asked legal questions. Mark checked databases. Another associate, Priya Nair, tracked draft changes. Richard came and went, taking calls in the hallway and returning with worse news each time. Caldwell's team was refusing to provide native files. The banks wanted reassurance. A board member had asked whether Richard had lost control of the process, which Annie understood to mean, why did you let a girl with a mop stop a rich man's deal? No one said that in front of her. They did not have to. At 3 o'clock, Priya pushed back from her laptop and rubbed her eyes. I need coffee. Richard said, get whatever everyone wants. Annie kept reading. Priya paused at the door. Annie? I'm okay. That wasn't the question. Coffee? Annie looked up, surprised by the normalness of it. Black. 2 sugars, if they have it. Priya smiled. They have sugar on this floor. We're not animals. When she left, Mark leaned back in his chair. Can I ask you something? Eleanor said. Carefully. Mark looked embarrassed. How did you learn to read like this? Annie kept her pencil on the page. I told you. My mother. No, I mean, this. He gestured toward the schedules. The formatting. The numbers. The way you notice when something feels off. Annie thought about the kitchen table, the soup cans, the stack of envelopes with red print. Her mother's hand circling words while pretending not to be tired. When a mistake can cost you heat in February, you read different, she said. When a sentence can decide if your mother gets treatment, you don't skim. Mark looked down. I'm sorry. Annie did not know what to do with that kind of apology. It was not aimed at something he had done. It was aimed at a world he had not had to study. Eleanor saved them both. Back to work. Priya returned with coffee and a paper bag from a deli downstairs. I got sandwiches. Turkey. Roast beef. Veggie. Annie hesitated. Priya noticed. Company card. Eat before you start seeing hidden clauses in the napkins. Annie took turkey. Thank you. Richard watched that exchange from the doorway. Something in his face shifted when Annie unwrapped the sandwich slowly. As if accepting food in a room like this required permission she did not want to need, he said, There will be dinner brought in later. Annie looked at him. I have a shift tonight. Eleanor shook her head. Not tonight. Your consulting agreement has you here until 6, and then you go home. My cleaning supervisor has been informed, Richard said. Paid. And Mrs. Walker? Paid as well. Annie nodded once and returned to the document. Good. Mark hid a smile. Near 5, Annie found the first real crack after page 8. It sat inside an appendix marked Disclosure Confirmation, a harmless title, if anyone had ever made one. The paragraph confirmed that all foreign affiliate obligations had been fully scheduled or incorporated by operational reference. Annie circled operational reference 3 times. Eleanor leaned over. What bothers you? That phrase doesn't sound like the rest of the document. Because everything else says by reference. This says operational reference, like they needed a second door. Priya searched the document. Operational reference appears only twice, here and in an exhibit index. Open the index, Eleanor said. Priya did. There it was. Operational reference file. Or 17. Unavailable in printed binder. Accessible by secure data room. Richard's voice flattened. We didn't receive OR 17. Mark checked the closing log. Caldwell marked it as non-material supporting data. Eleanor's face hardened. Request it now. Richard picked up his phone. No. Demand it. Annie sat back. Her eyes burned. For the first time all day, fear returned in a clean line. Page 8 was not a mistake. It was not even the whole trap. It was the string hanging from the wall. OR 17 was behind the wall. Richard made the call on speaker. Martin Graves answered after 3 rings. Richard, I assume you've calmed down. Richard looked at Eleanor, then at Annie's circled phrase. Send OR 17. A pause. I'm sorry? Operational reference file 17. Send it now. That file is not material to closing. Then you won't mind sending it. Martin's voice cooled. We'll review the request. Richard ended the call. No one spoke. Then Eleanor said, He's scared. Annie closed her pencil inside the notebook to mark the page. No. He's buying time. Richard looked at her. For what? Annie remembered Caldwell's parting words, the way he had lowered his voice near the door. Clever girls should learn when silence pays better. I don't know yet, she said, but she knew enough to feel the shape of it. Caldwell had not lost the deal, not in his mind. He had only lost the first room. At 6, Eleanor collected Annie's marked pages and placed them in a separate folder with her name on it. Carter Review Notes. The label looked strange, official, too clean for what it meant. Richard walked Annie and Sam to the elevator. He did not try small talk. At the doors, he said, Miss Carter. Thank you. Annie looked at him. Don't thank me yet. Why not? Because if they hid OR 17, they're not done. The elevator opened. Sam stepped in first. Richard held the door with one hand. Are you coming back tomorrow? Annie looked down at her denim sleeve, at the faint chemical stains that would never wash out. then back at the billionaire who had learned to ask instead of order. "I'll read the agreement first," she said. Eleanor, standing behind Richard, almost smiled again. Already drafted. Annie stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, she saw Richard turn back toward the conference room, where the papers waited, and the clean numbers had begun to look dirty. Downstairs, Sam leaned against the wall and sighed. "You know what your problem is?" Annie looked at him. "I only get one? You keep finding doors." She touched the notebook in her pocket. "No," she said. "They keep hiding them." The next morning, OR 17 did not arrive. What arrived instead was a headline. Annie saw it on Mrs. Walker's phone while they stood beside the service elevator, sharing coffee that tasted older than the building. "Cleaning girl halts $900, million Whitmore deal after boardroom outburst." June read it once, then moved the phone away from Annie's face. "Nope, we're not starting the day with poison." Annie took the phone gently and looked anyway. The article had no author photo, only a business news logo and a paragraph written to sound careful while doing damage. It said Richard Whitmore had suspended a major acquisition after an emotional interruption by a member of the evening cleaning staff. It said sources close to Caldwell International believed the delay resulted from confusion over formatting language already disclosed in prior drafts. It said the young woman, identified only as Annie C., had no legal training. No mention of page 8, no mention of white font, no mention of Schedule 8F. June watched her read. "They got your name?" "Half of it." "That's worse. Makes you sound like a rumor." Sam came from the security desk, cane tapping harder than usual. "Let me see." June handed him the phone. His face did not change much, but Annie knew him well enough to see anger settle behind his eyes. "They're trying to make it about how you walked in," he said, "not what you found." Annie gave the phone back. "That was always going to happen." "No," June said. "Don't make peace with it just because you saw it coming." Before Annie could answer, the elevator opened and Eleanor Price stepped out with Priya behind her. Eleanor wore a gray coat over yesterday's black suit, and her hair was pinned tighter than usual. "Annie," she said, "come upstairs." Annie's stomach tightened. "Because of the article?" "Because of that. And because Caldwell still hasn't produced OR 17. Sam moved beside Annie. "She eats first." Eleanor blinked. June lifted the paper bag in her hand. "Biscuit sandwich." She didn't have breakfast. Eleanor looked at Annie, then at the bag. "Bring it." Upstairs, the 36th floor conference room had changed overnight. More boxes, more printouts, 2 extra attorneys, a whiteboard listing draft versions by date. On the far side, Richard Whitmore stood with his phone against his ear, not speaking, only listening. When he saw Annie, he ended the call. "You saw it?" he asked. "Yes. It's false." Annie set her bag down. "It's not completely false. I do clean." Richard looked ashamed before he looked angry. "That's not what I meant." "I know what you meant." Eleanor placed a printed copy of the article on the table. "Caldwell's media team is feeding this language. Emotional interruption. No legal training. Formatting confusion. They're building a story before we finish building the record." Priya opened her laptop. It's already been picked up by 3 business blogs. Mark Delaney, looking like he had slept in his shirt, added, "A morning cable segment used the phrase janitor theory." June, who had come up without asking permission, put the biscuit sandwich in front of Annie. "Say that again while I'm standing here." Mark held up both hands. "I'm quoting them, Mrs. Walker." "Then quote better people." Richard turned to Eleanor. "Can we respond?" "We can, but carefully. If we accuse Caldwell publicly before the version audit is finished, they'll claim defamation and distraction. Right now, we preserve evidence and demand OR 17 again." Annie unwrapped the sandwich but did not eat. "They're not sending it." Eleanor looked at her. "Why do you say that?" "Because if it helped them, you'd already have it." Richard's mouth tightened. "She's right." Eleanor picked up a folder. Caldwell sent something else instead. A letter claiming Annie may have accessed privileged transaction materials without authorization and that any review based on her observation is contaminated. Annie's fingers stopped on the paper wrapper. Sam's voice lowered. "Contaminated?" Richard said. "They're trying to make her the problem." June let out a short laugh with no humor. "Trying?" Eleanor sat across from Annie, not at the head of the table. "Listen to me carefully. You did not steal a document. You were asked to deliver a file. You noticed something on a page in plain view. That matters. Martin Graves' letter lay on the table, crisp and formal. Annie did not touch it. Will they say I stole it anyway? Yes, Eleanor said. Richard shot her a look. Eleanor did not soften it. She deserves the truth. Annie finally took a bite of the sandwich. It was warm, with egg and cheese and too much pepper. For a moment, the normal taste of food steadied her better than anyone's reassurance. What do they want? She asked. Eleanor hesitated. Richard answered. They want me to proceed with the signing after a technical cleanup. Annie looked up. You're not. No. Then what do they really want? No one answered fast enough. Priya turned her laptop around. On the screen was another post, this one from an anonymous account with a few thousand followers. Who is Annie C? Sources say Whitmore's new advisor has a history of instability and was never cleared for access to deal documents. Annie read the sentence twice. Instability. She could feel the word trying to crawl under her skin. June reached for the laptop and turned it away. That is filth, Mark said. It gets worse. Someone is digging. They found your GED enrollment. Annie's face went still. That's public? Not easily, Mark said. But enough can be found if someone wants to make a point. Sam's hand closed around the top of his cane. She is not a point. Richard walked to the window, then back. I'll put out a statement. Full name. Full credit. Page 8. Hidden text. No ambiguity. Eleanor shook her head. You can't disclose contract details publicly yet. Then what can I say? That we suspended the signing pending document irregularities. That no employee or contractor should be harassed. That we stand by our process. June snorted. That sounds like a machine apologizing to another machine. Richard looked at Annie. What do you want said? The room turned to her again. Annie hated that question. Not because it was unfair, but because part of her wanted to say nothing. Part of her wanted to go back downstairs, finish her shift, ride the bus home, open her GED workbook, and become unknown again. But unknown had never protected her mother. Don't call me brave, she said. Richard frowned. What? That's what people say when they want the story to feel nice. Don't call me inspiring. Don't say I had a dream. Don't say I came from nowhere. I came from my mother. I came from work. Say the document had hidden language and I pointed it out. Eleanor wrote as Annie spoke. Annie continued. And say Mr. Sam didn't do anything wrong. Richard nodded. Done. Sam looked away, but not before Annie saw his eyes shine. By noon, Whitmore Global released a short statement. It did not satisfy anyone, because the truth rarely fits into corporate language. The market still reacted. Calls came in. Board members demanded updates. Caldwell's team refused OR 17 again, this time saying the file was administratively unavailable. Eleanor read the email aloud and laughed once. Administratively unavailable. That's a new dress on an old lie. Annie had gone back to the schedules. Her pencil moved down a column of entity names until it stopped. Miss Price? Eleanor came over. Annie tapped a name near the bottom. Thomas Greer again. Priya pulled her chair closer. Where? Here. Registered contact for Caldwell Rhine Holdings. Mark searched. Same name appears in the metadata notes from the Scholarship Foundation database. Annie looked at him. What Scholarship Foundation? Mark froze. Eleanor's eyes cut toward him. Richard spoke from the doorway. What foundation? Mark looked uncomfortable. It came up in a background scan. Future Door Scholarship Fund. It has a registered agent named Thomas Greer. I didn't think it mattered yet. Annie's chest tightened, though she did not know why. Why were you scanning scholarship foundations? Eleanor answered before Mark could make it worse. Because Caldwell is digging into you. We started looking for anything connected to their network that might be used to approach you. June, who had been sorting extra copies into stacks, went still. Approach her how? Eleanor's phone rang before she could answer. She looked at the number, then at Richard. Unknown caller, routed through reception. They asked for Annie Carter. The room lost its motion. Annie stared at the phone. Sam said, "Don't take it." Eleanor said, "Put it on speaker. Say nothing beyond hello." Richard moved closer but kept his distance. Eleanor answered. This is Eleanor Price. A woman's voice came through, warm and practiced. Miss Price, my name is Caroline Webb. I'm calling from Future Door Scholarship Fund. We're hoping to speak with Annie Carter about an opportunity that could change her life. No one moved. Annie looked at the page under her hand, at the name Thomas Greer, then at Eleanor's phone. The woman continued, sweet as poured syrup. We saw Annie's story, and we believe a young woman like her deserves a path forward. Tuition, housing, mentoring. No strings that would burden her. Just support. June whispered, Lord, they work fast. Eleanor's face had gone cold. Send the materials to my office. We'd prefer to speak with Annie directly. I'm sure you would. There was a pause, still polite. Miss Price, this is a generous offer. Annie reached across the table and tapped the mute button off before anyone could stop her. This is Annie, she said. The woman brightened. Annie, sweetheart, I'm so glad. You don't know me, but I think you and I should talk about your future. Annie looked at Thomas Greer's name on the schedule. My future reads contracts first, she said. Then she muted the call again. For the first time that day, Richard smiled, not with amusement, but with something like respect. Eleanor ended the call and leaned back. They're circling. Annie picked up her pencil. No, she said, writing Thomas Greer's name for the second time that day. They're scared. Future Door sent the packet in less than 20 minutes. It arrived by email as if someone had been waiting with a finger over the button. Eleanor printed one copy for herself and one for Annie, then laid the pages on the table without sliding them too close. Read at your pace, she said. Annie did not answer. She pulled the first page toward her and flattened it with both hands. The letterhead was soft blue. The logo showed an open door with sunlight behind it. The words were chosen like flowers for a funeral. Opportunity, dignity, promise, leadership, community. Annie had seen that kind of language before. Her mother used to call it perfume on a locked box. Caroline Webb's cover letter began with Annie's remarkable courage, then moved quickly into what the foundation wanted to offer. Full tuition at a college of Annie's choice, housing assistance, a monthly living stipend, professional clothing, mentoring, legal career preparation, and access to a network of high-impact leaders. June Walker read over Annie's shoulder for one paragraph, then folded her arms. That is a lot of honey for someone they met on the phone. Sam stood near the door. Honey draws flies, too. Richard did not sit. He paced once, stopped, then forced himself still. Can they legally do this? Eleanor looked up from her copy. Offer money? Yes. Offer money to influence a witness? That depends on what page 11 says. Annie had already turned to page 11. The print was smaller there. The tone changed too. Less honey, more wire. She read the first paragraph, then the second. Her face gave nothing away, but her pencil began to move. Priya leaned closer. What did you find? Annie circled a phrase. Public cooperation. Eleanor came around the table. Read it out. Annie read, slowly. Recipient agrees to provide reasonable public cooperation in connection with any media, legal, educational, or institutional communication deemed beneficial by the foundation or its affiliated partners. Mark let out a low breath. Affiliated partners. Annie turned the page. They define that on page 14. Eleanor flipped. Of course they do. Annie found the definition and tapped it. Affiliated partners includes donors, strategic sponsors, legal representatives, investment partners, and any entity sharing administrative, charitable, or advisory services with the foundation. Richard's voice hardened. That's Caldwell. Maybe, Eleanor said. Keep reading. Annie did. The room waited. Phones buzzed and went unanswered. Outside the window, Chicago kept moving, careless and cold. On page 17, Annie stopped again. This time she did not circle the line. She underlined it twice. What? Richard asked. Annie's voice stayed calm. They own my story. June took a step forward. What do you mean they own your story? Annie read the clause. Recipient grants the foundation irrevocable rights to use recipient's name, likeness, image, personal history, public statements, written statements, recorded statements, educational journey, and related biographical materials for purposes deemed consistent with the Foundation's mission. Sam's cane tapped once. Richard said, "No." Eleanor's eyes were cold. "Yes." Annie kept reading because stopping would let the anger in. Recipient further agrees not to issue independent public statements concerning any matter involving affiliated partners without prior written review. Mark whispered, "That's a gag." "No," Annie said. "It's a leash." No one corrected her. Richard looked toward the door, then back at Eleanor. "We should call them." "Not yet," Eleanor said. Annie turned to the final pages. "There's a signature block." Eleanor came closer. The authorized representative for Future Door Scholarship Fund was not Caroline Webb. Her name appeared only in the cover letter. The signature page listed a different person as administrative counsel, Thomas Greer. For a moment, the room fell into a silence Annie could feel through the paper. Priya turned to her laptop. "Same spelling?" Annie slid the page across. "Same spelling." Mark pulled up his notes from Caldwell Rhine Holdings. "Same address too, Suite 410, Wilmington, Delaware." Eleanor took both pages and placed them side by side. Thomas Greer signs for the Foundation offering Annie money and silence. He appears as registered contact for Caldwell Rhine Holdings. He appears in the metadata chain tied to foreign affiliate debt. Richard's face had gone flat with anger. Victor sent this to her. Eleanor nodded once. Through a Foundation wearing church clothes, June looked at Annie. "Baby, did you ever apply for anything like this?" "No." "Then they found you." Annie looked at the pages. Tuition, housing, food, a future that did not smell like bleach, a closet with clothes that fit, a room with heat that worked, a class schedule printed with her name. For 1 second, the offer hurt more than the insult had. It showed her the life she wanted, then wrapped it in silence. She pushed the packet away. Richard spoke carefully. "Annie, we can protect you." She looked at him. "Can you pay my rent without buying my mouth?" The question struck him hard. Eleanor answered instead. "If you continue working as a consultant, you'll be paid under the agreement you signed. Anything beyond that we document cleanly. No gifts." Annie nodded. "Good." Sam's voice softened. "You don't have to prove you can suffer. I'm not." Annie folded the first page back over the packet. "I'm proving I can read." Eleanor picked up the phone. "We respond in writing. Short. No emotion." Richard said, "I want my name on it." "No," Eleanor said. "Mine. This is my company. And this is witness contact. You stay out of the first letter." Richard accepted it, though not happily. Eleanor dictated while Priya typed, "Miss Webb, we acknowledge receipt of the materials sent to Annie Carter. Miss Carter declines the offer. Any further attempt to contact her directly regarding matters connected to Whitmore Global Holdings, Caldwell International Partners, Future Door Scholarship Fund, or related entities should be directed to my office." Annie looked up. "Add 1 line." Eleanor waited. "Tell them I said the paper is pretty, but the leash still shows." Eleanor's mouth twitched. "I'll translate that," June said. "Don't translate it too much," Eleanor added. "Miss Carter has reviewed the materials and identified provisions she considers inconsistent with an unrestricted educational grant." Annie shrugged. "That's lawyer for leash." Priya sent the response. For the first time since the call, Richard sat down. He looked older than he had that morning. "How did you know not to trust it?" Annie thought about her mother's kitchen table, the insurance letters, the day Martha had smiled at a charity form and said, "They never give the poor a free door without counting who gets locked in." "Because it came too fast," Annie said. "Because they wanted me alone. Because they used words that made the cage sound like a scholarship." Sam nodded. "Your mama's voice again." "Always." Mark's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and swore under his breath. Eleanor turned. "What now?" "Another article." He hesitated before reading it aloud. "Whitmore deal delay deepens as anonymous sources question cleaning workers' credibility." Richard closed his eyes for 1 second. Priya took the phone from Mark and read further. "It says Annie Carter may have been offered educational assistance by a charitable foundation and declined, raising questions about her motives." June slapped her palm on the table. "They offered the rope and blamed her for not wearing it." Annie felt heat rise behind her eyes, but she did not cry, not in that room, not with those papers on the table. Richard stood again. Enough. We go public. Eleanor shook her head, not with contract details, then with her name. Correctly. Annie looked at him. Don't turn me into a poster. I won't. They will. Richard had no answer. That honesty mattered more than a promise. Eleanor gathered the scholarship papers into a folder and wrote on the tab, Future Door, Greer. Annie watched the name disappear under black marker. Thomas Greer was no longer just a name on a schedule. He was a hand reaching through 3 doors at once. Near 6, Eleanor told everyone to stop for the day. No one listened. Richard made calls to board members. Priya kept digging through foundation records. Mark searched Delaware filings. June left to cover Annie's old shift without asking permission. Sam waited by the elevator. Annie packed her notebook, then paused beside the rejected scholarship packet. Eleanor noticed. Are you all right? Annie gave a small, tired smile. I'm trying not to hate the part of me that wanted it. Eleanor's face softened. Wanting a door open doesn't make you weak. It does if the door is bait. No, Eleanor said. It makes the bait cruel. Annie looked at her for a moment, then nodded. On the elevator down, Sam handed Annie a wrapped dinner plate from June. Fried chicken, green beans, and cornbread in a plastic container. She said if you don't eat it, she'll come to your place and lecture you through the door. Annie took it. She would. She has. The elevator hummed downward. Annie held the food in one hand and her mother's notebook in the other. Upstairs, the rich men were choosing language for war. Downstairs, June had packed cornbread because somebody still had to keep Annie alive through it. When the doors opened, Sam looked at her. You did right again. Annie stepped out. I'm tired of doing right. I know. She looked back at him. Does it ever get easier? Sam considered lying, then didn't. No, but you get harder to move. Annie walked into the lobby, past the security desk, past the polished reception wall, past people who now said her name in lowered voices. Outside, Caldwell's story was spreading. Inside her pocket, Martha Carter's notebook pressed against her side like a second heartbeat. By Friday morning, Caldwell stopped pretending the fight was private. The lawsuit reached Eleanor's inbox at 8:06 a.m., 42 pages long, filed in commercial arbitration, and copied to every lawyer with a title worth printing. By 8:30, 3 business outlets had the headline. By 9, the lobby screens were showing Richard Whitmore's face beside Victor Caldwell's, with Annie's name buried halfway down the story like a match waiting for dry grass. Caldwell International seeks $150 million after Whitmore abandons deal. Annie read the headline from the security desk, standing beside Sam with June's cornbread still wrapped in foil inside her bag. They sued? She asked. Sam looked at the screen. That's what rich folks do when the truth costs too much. The anchor on the lobby television spoke with a calm face and hungry eyes. Sources close to Caldwell International say the breakdown followed an unusual intervention by a cleaning employee who allegedly accessed sensitive transaction documents during a private signing meeting. June came up behind Annie with a spray bottle in one hand and a rag in the other. Allegedly. That word is how cowards put perfume on a lie. Annie kept reading the crawl at the bottom of the screen. Untrained worker at center of dispute. Her stomach tightened, but her face stayed still. Sam turned the volume down. Don't let a TV tell you who you are before breakfast. I already know who I am, Annie said. That's why they keep trying to rename me. Upstairs, the 36th floor conference room had become a war room. Eleanor had printed the lawsuit in full, tabbed it, marked it, and placed one copy at each seat. Richard stood near the window with both hands on the back of a chair. His board had already called twice. His bankers had called 3 times. His public relations team wanted language. His outside counsel wanted caution. His temper wanted Victor Caldwell in the room. Eleanor did not care what his temper wanted. Sit, she told him. Richard looked at her. Sit down, Richard. Angry men skip paragraphs. He sat. Annie entered with Sam a few steps behind her. Eleanor looked up, and for a moment her face softened before returning to work. Annie, you don't have to read all of it today. Annie put her mother's notebook on the table. Yes, I do. Richard pulled out a chair for her, then seemed to realize what he was doing. Annie noticed but did not comment. She sat, opened the lawsuit, and began. The complaint was written with the clean cruelty of people who knew how to wound without raising their voice. It accused Whitmore Global of breaching the negotiation agreement, damaging Caldwell's reputation, interfering with financing, and suspending the signing based on the unqualified observations of an unauthorized cleaning worker. Annie read that sentence twice. Mark Delaney said quietly, "We can strike that language later." Annie did not look up. "It's already doing what they wrote it to do." Eleanor nodded. "Exactly." Page 6 claimed the hidden text was non-operative formatting residue. Page 9 said all material obligations had been disclosed. Page 14 accused Whitmore of acting under emotional pressure following a public embarrassment. Page 21 named Annie Carter directly. She stopped there. Richard saw it. "What?" Annie read aloud. "Miss Carter, a non-employee of Whitmore Global, with no legal, financial, or transactional credentials, obtained proximity to confidential documents through unclear circumstances and provided speculative statements that Mr. Whitmore improperly relied upon. June, who had come upstairs carrying a tray of coffee no one asked for, set it down harder than necessary. Unclear circumstances? She carried a folder because your fancy self called down for it." Richard looked at Eleanor. "Can we answer that today? We answer in arbitration, not with our blood pressure." Annie kept going. By page 30, her pencil had slowed. The lawsuit was not just asking for money. It was building a cage. Annie should not have been there. Annie should not have touched the paper. Annie should not be trusted. And because Richard listened to her, the entire suspension was flawed. On page 34, she stopped again. Eleanor noticed. "Annie? This paragraph," Annie said. "They mention or 17. Richard leaned in. "Where?" She turned the complaint toward him. "They say or 17 was administratively unavailable because it was still undergoing routine reconciliation." Mark frowned. "That's not what they told us. They said it was non-material." Priya pulled up the email chain. "Correct. First, non-material. Then administratively unavailable. Now routine reconciliation." Eleanor circled the paragraph. 3 explanations in 3 days. Annie tapped the line with her pencil. People change excuses when the first lie doesn't fit the second room. Richard looked at her with something close to admiration, but she was already reading again. At noon, the board convened by video. Diane Mercer appeared on the large screen from her office. Silver hair neat, expression controlled. She had been on Whitmore's board for 9 years and spoke with the confidence of someone who had never had to ask whether a bus came after midnight. "Richard," Diane said, "the stock is down 6% since open." Richard folded his hands. "I'm aware. We have pension funds calling. We have analysts asking whether you suspended a major transaction over a formatting dispute raised by a member of the cleaning staff." Annie sat at the side of the room, outside the camera frame. She knew that was Eleanor's choice. Protection, maybe. Or strategy. Either way. She heard every word. Richard said, "It was not a formatting dispute. Then give us the full evidence." "Eleanor is preparing it." Diane's mouth tightened. "We need stabilization. Caldwell has indicated privately they are willing to discuss revised terms." Eleanor looked up sharply. "Privately to whom?" Diane ignored that. "The claim is large, but a settlement may be possible. The market needs confidence." Richard's voice cooled. "Confidence in what? A deal they hid debt inside? Confidence that you are still making decisions based on counsel and not public shame." The room went very still. Richard leaned forward. "Say what you mean, Diane." She did. "I mean you were humiliated on your own floor, in front of your advisors, by a young woman you had insulted. Since then, you have been making increasingly personal decisions. That concerns me." Annie felt her ears grow hot. Sam shifted by the door. Richard did not look toward Annie. He kept his eyes on the screen. The hidden text exists. The schedule exists. The metadata exists. The scholarship approach exists. Which of those is personal? Diane paused. "The girl is personal." Annie's hand tightened around her pencil. Richard's face hardened. "Her name is Annie Carter." Diane sighed. "Names are not strategy." "No," Richard said, "but forgetting them is how we got here." The call ended badly. Not loudly. Badly in the boardroom way, with polite words sharpened thin. Diane wanted daily updates and an emergency session by Monday. If the lawsuit threatened the company's stability, she said, all options had to remain open. After the screen went dark, Richard stood. Eleanor said, "Don't punch a wall. It creates privilege issues." June muttered, "I'd allow one wall." Annie closed the lawsuit. "They want you to blame me." No one answered. She looked at Richard. "That's what this is. If you say I was wrong, Caldwell gets the deal back or gets paid. Your board gets a story that doesn't scare investors." Everybody walks away cleaner. Richard stared at the table. Not everybody. Annie waited. He looked up. "Not you." It was a simple answer, and that made it harder to distrust. By late afternoon, the media story had worsened. "Cleaning girl consultant" became a phrase on cable. Someone posted a cropped image from the lobby apology, circling Annie's denim jacket. A man with a podcast called her the sidewalk expert who spooked a billionaire. Another asked whether companies were now supposed to let cleaning crews review contracts. June watched 30 seconds and turned it off. If stupidity made noise, that man would need a permit. Annie laughed despite herself, then stopped when her phone buzzed. Unknown number, then another, then a text. "We know what your mother owed." Annie went cold. Sam saw her face. "What is it?" She handed him the phone. Sam read the message once, then passed it to Eleanor without a word. Eleanor's expression changed from concern to something harder. "Forward it to me. Do not delete anything." Richard came closer. "What happened?" Eleanor showed him. For a moment, Richard said nothing. Then he turned toward the room. "Find out who sent that." Mark was already moving. "It's probably masked." "Then unmask it." Eleanor's voice was low. "Richard." He stopped. She nodded toward Annie. He looked at her then, and seemed to remember that anger could fill a room so completely, it left no air for the person it claimed to defend. "I'm sorry," he said. Annie put her phone face down on the table. "Don't be sorry. Be useful." June made a small sound. "That's my girl." Eleanor gathered the lawsuit pages into a stack. "We prepare for arbitration. They will subpoena Annie. They will try to make her the issue." Richard said, "She doesn't testify unless necessary." Annie looked at him. "If they make me the issue, I'm already testifying whether I sit there or not." No one corrected her. Outside, evening fell early over Chicago. The windows reflected the room back at them. Lawyers, papers, coffee cups. A billionaire losing control of the story. And a young woman whose name was now moving through places she had never entered. At 6, Annie opened her mother's notebook and wrote one line beneath Martha's old words. "They can call me untrained. They cannot call the page blank." She closed the notebook before anyone could see. Richard stood near the door as Sam walked her to the elevator. "Miss Carter," he said. Annie turned. "I won't say you misunderstood." She held his eyes for a moment. "Don't say it when it gets expensive either." The elevator doors opened. Richard did not answer quickly, which was better than a promise made too fast. Finally he said, "I won't." Annie stepped into the elevator beside Sam. As the doors closed, she saw Eleanor hand Richard the lawsuit again, open to the page where Annie had been named. Caldwell had moved the fight from hidden ink to public accusation, and the next room would not be a conference room. It would be a hearing, with microphones, sworn statements, and men who knew how to make truth sound like trespassing. The settlement offer came Monday morning before the coffee did. Eleanor Price found it in her inbox at 7:18. Printed it twice. Read it once standing, then again sitting down. By the time Richard arrived on the 36th floor, she had placed one copy in front of his chair and written one word across the top in blue ink. "Trap." Richard picked it up. "Caldwell?" "Martin Graves, on behalf of Caldwell International." Annie sat 2 seats away with her mother's notebook open, but she had not written anything yet. Sam stood near the wall because he said chairs made his legs stiff when he was angry. June had brought coffee in a cardboard carrier and stayed after setting it down, daring anyone to ask why a member of the cleaning staff was in the room. Richard read the first page. His face did not change until the 3rd paragraph. Then his jaw locked. "They'll withdraw the arbitration claim," he said. Eleanor nodded. "Keep reading. They'll remove the disputed language." "Keep reading. They'll reopen negotiations under revised terms." "Keep reading, Richard." He did. The room waited. On page 2, buried in the middle of a paragraph written to sound like peace, Caldwell's demand appeared. Whitmore Global would issue a public statement, acknowledging that the suspension of the signing had relied on an incorrect interpretation by an unauthorized individual without legal credentials. The statement would say, no intentional concealment had been found. It would say Caldwell had acted in good faith. It would not mention page 8, white font, Schedule 8F, OR 17, Future Door, or Thomas Greer. It would name Annie Carter. Richard set the page down. No. Eleanor leaned back. That was my first draft response too. Mark Delaney, pale from another night of bad sleep, said, from a market standpoint, if we accept this, the stock probably recovers within hours. June turned toward him. Try that sentence again with a soul in it. Mark looked at Annie. I didn't mean... Yes, you did, Annie said, not cruelly. You meant the numbers get better if I get smaller. Mark closed his mouth. Richard pushed the paper away. We're not doing it. Eleanor held up a hand. Before you decide. The board is meeting at 10. I said no, and the board may not. The room quieted. Annie looked from Eleanor to Richard. Can they make you? Richard did not answer fast enough. Eleanor did. They can pressure him. If they believe his refusal exposes the company to avoidable loss, they can move against him. June folded her arms. So Caldwell sends a lie, and the board considers signing it because the lie is cheaper. That is one way to describe corporate governance, Eleanor said. Sam's cane tapped once. Bad way to run a conscience. At 10, the board appeared on the large screen. Diane Mercer sat in the center square, wearing a cream jacket, and the expression of a woman who had already counted the votes. Two other directors joined from offices, one from a car, another from what looked like a country club dining room. Richard sat at the table. Eleanor sat beside him. Annie remained out of camera range, though everyone on the board knew she was there. Diane began without greeting. Richard, Caldwell's proposal is the first rational off-ramp we've had since this became public. Richard's voice was controlled. It requires us to lie. It requires us to de-escalate. It names Annie Carter as wrong. It says her interpretation was incorrect. It wasn't. A director named Paul Hensley leaned toward his camera. Eleanor, can you confirm that in a court-tested sense? Eleanor answered evenly. We can confirm the hidden text exists, that it was not visible in the clean PDF, that it cross-references Schedule 8, F, and that Caldwell has refused to produce OR 17. That is not the same as proving fraud, Hensley said. No, Eleanor said. That is why people who commit fraud often get comfortable before they get caught. Diane's eyes narrowed. We are not here for moral commentary. We are here to protect shareholder value, Richard said. Shareholder value was not protected by the hidden clause, and it will not be protected by a $150 million arbitration loss, Diane replied. Caldwell is offering a full withdrawal. The market will read that as stability. Annie listened from the side of the room, each sentence pressing into her ribs. She had known they might sacrifice her. Knowing did not make it hurt less. Another director, Howard Bell, spoke with the tired tone of a man trying to sound kind while holding a knife. No one wants to harm the young woman. But this is one contractor. One public statement. We have thousands of employees, retirement accounts, long-term debt covenants. Richard, we cannot let guilt steer a public company. Richard's eyes lifted. Guilt? He said. Howard spread his hands. You admitted yourself. You spoke poorly to her. That is regrettable. But you cannot repair that personal failure by risking the enterprise. Annie felt Sam shift beside her. Richard's voice grew colder. My personal failure was not listening to her sooner. Diane sighed. Richard, the girl will survive a correction. She has already received more public sympathy than most people get in a lifetime. Annie looked down at her hands. The girl, not Annie, not Miss Carter. The girl. Richard leaned toward the camera. Her name is Annie Carter. Diane's patience snapped at the edge. Names do not erase exposure. No, Richard said. But lies create it. Hensley said, if we reject the settlement and lose, your position will be reviewed. There it is, Eleanor murmured. Richard looked at each square on the screen. If this board wants to publish Caldwell's statement, you will need a different signature. Diane went still. Are you threatening resignation? I'm stating a fact. You would put your chairmanship at risk over this? Richard did not look toward Annie. He did not turn it into a performance. He kept his eyes on the board. I called her a beggar when she brought me the truth, he said. I will not call her a liar to buy myself peace. For the first time, no director answered. Diane finally said, we will reconvene after the preliminary arbitration hearing. Until then, no public escalation without board review. The screen went dark one square at a time. Richard sat back. He looked tired, not triumphant. Annie stood. Everyone turned. You shouldn't lose your company over me, she said. Richard shook his head. This isn't over you. It has my name on it. It has their lie on it. She looked at the settlement paper. People like me get named in lies all the time. Most of the time, nobody risks anything to correct them. Richard's face tightened. Maybe that is the problem. Annie had no answer ready. Sam came closer. You all need air. Eleanor checked her watch. We still have air, Sam repeated, and somehow the room obeyed him. He took Annie downstairs, not outside into the cameras near the front entrance, but through the service corridor to the small loading area where the winter air slipped through the seams of the metal door. It smelled like cardboard, cold concrete, and diesel from trucks that had come and gone before dawn. Annie leaned against the wall. Sam stayed beside her. I don't want to be the reason people lose jobs, she said. You didn't hide that clause. I know. You didn't sue for $150 million. I know. You didn't put your name in Caldwell's mouth. Annie closed her eyes. I know, Mr. Sam. Then stop carrying what they packed. She opened them again. Easy to say. No, Sam said. Hard to live. That's why I'm saying it slow. She almost smiled. He shifted his weight off his bad leg. I spent a long time wearing uniforms. Army, security. Same lesson in both. Folks love a chain of command until the command is wrong. Then a person has to decide whether standing still is obedience or cowardice. Annie looked at him. Were you ever scared? Every time it mattered. What did you do? Stayed. The word was plain enough to hold. Back upstairs, the settlement offer lay on the table. Eleanor had begun drafting a refusal. Mark and Priya were building the arbitration binder. Richard stood at the window, speaking with no one. When Annie returned, Eleanor looked up. You don't have to be in this next part. Yes, I do. Richard turned. Annie sat down and pulled the settlement offer toward her. She read Caldwell's paragraph again. The one that would have made her the mistake, the interruption, the unqualified girl whose wrong words shook a company. Then she took her pencil and wrote in the margin, if they need me to lie for peace, it was never peace. Eleanor read it over her shoulder and nodded once. May I use that? In legal words? In better words. Annie pushed the paper back. Use it however makes them angriest. June, from the doorway, lifted the coffee carrier. That's the best thing I've heard all day. By late afternoon, the refusal went out. Polite. Firm. Deadly in the way Eleanor's letters could be. Whitmore Global rejected Caldwell's terms, reaffirmed the suspension based on document irregularities, demanded OR 17, preserved all rights, and warned against further contact with Annie Carter outside counsel. 15 minutes later, Caldwell's team filed their witness list for the preliminary hearing. Eleanor read the names aloud. Richard Whitmore, Eleanor Price, Mark Delaney, a representative from Caldwell's document team, Martin Graves. Then she stopped. Annie already knew. Eleanor looked at her. They named you. Sam's hand closed around his cane. June whispered something under her breath that sounded like a prayer with teeth. Richard said, we fight it. Annie shook her head. No, Annie. If they're going to make me the reason, then I don't want them talking about me while I'm not in the room. Eleanor studied her. They will try to humiliate you. They already did. This will be worse. Annie touched the notebook in her pocket. My mother used to say people hide the ugliest words where they think nobody will look. She lifted her eyes. I'm tired of letting them choose the room. No one spoke for a moment. Then Eleanor closed the witness list. All right, we prepare. That night, Annie stayed late by choice. Mark played Martin Graves in practice, asking sharp questions about her job, her education, why she touched the contract, whether she understood fiduciary duty, whether she wanted money, whether she wanted attention. The first time, Annie's voice shook. The second time, less. The fifth time, she looked Mark in the eye and said, I was not invited into that room to give advice. I was sent there with a folder. The paper did the rest. At 9, Eleanor ended the session. Outside the conference room, Richard waited near the elevator. I meant what I said to the board, he told her. Annie looked at him. I know. That doesn't mean I can guarantee the outcome. I know that too. He nodded, humbled by the fact that she did. When the elevator opened, Sam was inside, holding a takeout bag from a diner down the street. Turkey Club, he said. June said no more crackers for dinner. Annie stepped in. As the doors closed, she looked back at Richard standing alone in the hallway of the expensive floor. The settlement offer rejected, the hearing ahead, and her name now written on the witness list. Caldwell had offered peace at the price of her silence. For the first time since this began, Annie understood that saying no had started a bigger war. The preliminary hearing was set for Monday at 9, which meant Annie spent Sunday evening learning how not to let a room eat her alive. Eleanor Price had rented a small meeting room at a hotel 3 blocks from Harrington and Vale, away from the office elevators and reporters who had begun waiting near the lobby, with cameras tucked under their coats. The hotel was old Chicago. Brass elevator buttons, dark wood, thick carpet, coffee in silver urns, and a front desk clerk who called every woman ma'am without making it sound like an insult. Annie arrived in her denim jacket with her mother's notebook under one arm. June Walker had tried to make her wear a black blazer from a cousin who worked at a bank. It fits, June had said. It makes me look like I'm pretending. June had sighed. Fine, but wear the white blouse. So Annie wore the white blouse under the denim jacket. The cuffs were a little loose. The collar sat unevenly no matter how many times she fixed it. Sam told her to leave it alone. If they need your collar straight to hear the truth, they weren't listening anyway, he said. Now, in the hotel meeting room, Eleanor stood at a whiteboard with 3 words written in block letters. Facts. Tone. Pause. You answer only what is asked, Eleanor said. Not what you think they mean. Not what they imply. Not what they want the room to feel. If Martin Graves asks whether you are a licensed attorney, what do you say? No. Then stop. Annie nodded. Mark Delaney sat across from her, playing Martin Graves for the 3rd hour. He had gotten better at being cruel, which Annie did not enjoy but did appreciate. He looked down at his notes. Miss Carter, you clean offices for a living? Correct? Yes. You had no formal role in the Whitmore-Caldwell transaction, correct? Yes. You were not invited to provide legal analysis? No. You were not invited to speak at all, were you? Annie took a breath. Eleanor tapped the whiteboard. Pause. Annie let the breath finish. No, I was sent to deliver a file. Mark leaned forward. And yet you inserted yourself into a transaction worth $900 million. No, Annie said. I pointed at a line. Because you wanted attention? No. Because you wanted money? No. Because Richard Whitmore insulted you, and you wanted to embarrass him? Annie felt that one hit where Mark meant it to hit. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the chair. Eleanor waited. Sam, seated near the door with his cane across his knees, did not move. Annie answered slowly. Mr. Whitmore insulted me before I saw the line clearly. If I wanted to embarrass him, I could have walked away and let him sign it. Mark looked up. He was no longer acting for a second. Eleanor nodded once. Good. Again. They practiced until the hotel staff came in to remove the coffee urns. Annie's voice grew tired. Her back hurt from sitting straight. Every question seemed designed to pull her away from the page and into herself. Her job, her rent, her GED classes, her mother's bills, why she had not gone to college, why she had touched the contract, why she had refused the scholarship. At 8, June arrived with dinner in a brown paper bag from a diner down the street. Turkey clubs, fries, coleslaw, and 1 slice of pecan pie she claimed was for morale and blood sugar. Eleanor tried to keep reading while eating. June took the document from her hand. Lawyer lady, chew. Eleanor looked surprised, then obeyed. Richard came last. He had spent the afternoon on calls with the board. Diane Mercer had requested another emergency session if the hearing went badly. The markets were already bracing for Monday. Analysts had begun using the phrase governance crisis. Annie did not fully understand all of it. but she understood the sound of adults trying to say fear without admitting fear. Richard stepped into the room and stopped when he saw the takeout spread across the table. June pointed at the last sandwich. "That one's yours. Don't ask if it's organic." Richard picked it up. "Thank you, Mrs. Walker." June's eyebrows rose. "Look at that. Home training can be recovered." Annie almost laughed. The room needed it. After dinner, Eleanor handed Annie a slim folder. "This is tomorrow's layout. Retired Judge Margaret Harlan will preside. Caldwell sits on one side. We sit on the other. This is not a jury trial. It is a preliminary arbitration hearing, but the record matters. Graves will try to make you sound unqualified before he ever talks about page 8. Annie opened the folder. There was a diagram of the room, a witness chair, counsel tables, screen placement, exhibit stand. Her stomach tightened at the little square marked witness. Sam saw her face. "It's just a chair. It doesn't look like just a chair. Most chairs don't when a room wants you scared." Richard stood near the window, looking down at headlights moving through wet streets. "You do not have to do this alone." Annie looked at him. "Yes, I do." He turned. She closed the folder. "You can sit there. Miss Price can object. Mr. Sam can wait by the door. But when he asks me questions, I answer alone." Richard accepted that with a small nod. "Then you won't be abandoned while you do." It was not a grand line. That made it easier to believe. The next morning, the hotel hearing room smelled of coffee, paper, and winter coats. Reporters stood beyond the elevators, held back by hotel security. Annie walked between Eleanor and Sam, with Richard a few steps ahead. No one touched her. She was grateful for that. She needed to feel her own feet. The room itself was smaller than Annie had imagined, which somehow made it worse. One long table for Whitmore, one for Caldwell, a side table for exhibits, a court reporter near the wall. At the front sat Judge Margaret Harlan, retired, with short gray hair, plain glasses, and a fountain pen placed beside a stack of folders. She did not look impressed by anyone's suit. Victor Caldwell sat beside Martin Graves, calm in a charcoal jacket. When Annie entered, Caldwell glanced at her once, then looked away as if she were a delay in his schedule. Martin Graves did not look away. His smile was polite enough for a photograph and cold enough for a warning. Eleanor leaned toward Annie. "Remember, facts, tone, pause." Annie nodded. Sam took a seat behind her. June was not allowed inside the hearing room, but she had sent a text at 7:12 a.m. "Don't let them make you hurry. Truth walks fine at its own speed." Annie had read it 4 times in the elevator. Judge Harlan opened the hearing at 9 exactly. No speeches about justice. No wasted courtesy. She confirmed the matter, the parties, the emergency nature of the proceeding, and the limited scope. Whether Whitmore had a good faith basis to suspend signing pending review, whether Caldwell was entitled to immediate relief, and whether certain evidence should be preserved. Martin Graves stood first. He spoke smoothly. "Caldwell had negotiated for months," he said. "Whitmore had suffered embarrassment in a signing meeting, then panicked. The alleged hidden language was a formatting issue being inflated into an accusation. A major transaction could not be derailed because an unauthorized cleaning worker saw shadows on a page. He never raised his voice. He did not need to. The words were built to do the pushing for him." Eleanor's opening was shorter. "Your Honor, page 8 contains hidden text. Schedule 8. F contains undisclosed liabilities. Caldwell refuses to produce or 17. Future Door Scholarship Fund, tied through Thomas Greer to Caldwell-related entities. Contacted our witness after media leaks, targeted her credibility. We are not asking you to decide the entire case today. We are asking you not to reward concealment because it wore a clean suit." Judge Harlan wrote something down, then Martin stood again. "Caldwell calls Annie Carter." Annie heard her name move through the room. For half a second, she was back in the kitchen with her mother, looking at a hospital letter, circling a word she did not understand. Then she felt Sam behind her, not touching her, just there. She stood. The witness chair did not grow smaller as she approached it. She sat, placed both feet on the floor, and folded her hands where the court reporter could see them. Martin Graves walked toward the center of the room with a binder in one hand. "Good morning, Miss Carter," he said. Annie looked at him. then at the page 8 exhibit lying on the table between them. "Good morning," she said. And this time, when the room turned toward her, Annie did not lower her eyes. Martin Graves let the silence sit for a moment before he opened his binder. He knew how to use quiet. Annie could feel him arranging the room around her. The judge at the front, Caldwell at his table, Richard behind Eleanor, Sam behind her, the court reporter ready to catch every word. Martin wanted her to notice all of it before he asked the first question. "Miss Carter," he said, "you are currently employed as part of the cleaning staff at Harrington and Vale, correct?" "Yes." "You are not an attorney?" "No." "You have never attended law school?" "No." "You have not completed college?" "No." "You do not hold any license to review contracts, advise on acquisitions, or interpret corporate liability provisions?" "No." Martin gave a small nod, as if they had agreed on something important. "And yet you inserted yourself into a transaction valued at approximately $900 million. Eleanor rose halfway. "Objection. Mischaracterizes her role." Judge Harlan looked at Martin. "Rephrase." Martin did not seem bothered. "Miss Carter, you spoke during a private signing meeting, correct?" "Yes." "You were not invited to speak?" "No." "You were not invited to offer legal analysis?" "No." "You were not invited to touch the agreement?" Annie paused. "Facts. Tone. Pause. I pointed at the page," she said. "That was not my question. I touched the edge of the page when I showed them where to look." Martin turned slightly toward the judge. "So the answer is yes." Annie looked at Judge Harlan, not Martin. "Yes." Martin smiled. "Thank you. Now, when you entered that room, you were wearing a cleaning badge, correct?" "Yes." "A denim jacket?" "Yes." "You had been working on the service floors?" "Yes." "And you had no prior involvement in the Whitmore-Caldwell transaction?" "No prior involvement. Yet you expect this tribunal to believe that in a matter of seconds, while standing in a room where you had no business speaking, you found something that teams of attorneys, bankers, and executives had missed for months." Eleanor stood. "Objection." Judge Harlan raised a hand. "I will allow the question if it is answered as phrased." "Miss Carter?" Annie felt the room lean toward her without moving. She could hear Sam's cane shift once behind her. "No," Annie said. Martin blinked. "No? No. I don't expect anyone to believe it because of me. I expect them to look at page 8. A soft sound passed through Whitmore's side of the room. Not laughter. Recognition. Martin closed his binder halfway. "We will get to page 8. First, we will get to you." Annie kept her hands folded. "You were upset when Mr. Whitmore spoke to you in the conference room, weren't you?" "Yes." "He insulted you?" "Yes." "He called you a beggar?" "Yes." "And that hurt you?" Annie swallowed. "Yes." "So you had a reason to embarrass him?" "No." "No?" "If I wanted to embarrass him, I could have walked out and let him sign." Martin's jaw tightened. "You are fond of that answer." "It's the true one." Judge Harlan wrote something down. Martin walked to the exhibit table and picked up a printed copy of page 8. "Let's discuss what you claim to have seen." "You testified, or rather stated in preparation materials, that you noticed hidden text under a chart." "Yes." "You are aware that documents can contain formatting artifacts?" "Yes." "You are aware that printing can produce shadows?" "Yes." "You are aware that people can see patterns where no meaningful language exists?" "Yes." Martin lifted the page. "So it is possible that you saw a printing flaw and invented significance afterward?" "No." "You're certain?" "Yes." "Despite no training?" Annie's voice stayed even. "Training is not the only way people learn to read." Martin gave a dry smile. "That sounds nice. It is not an answer." "It is my answer." Eleanor looked down at her notes, hiding her expression. Martin placed page 8 on the screen. The financial chart appeared, enlarged. The lower right portion still seemed blank from the front. "Please show Judge Harlan the hidden language you claim exists." Annie looked to Eleanor. Eleanor nodded once. Annie stood only after Judge Harlan allowed it. She walked to the screen, feeling every step in her knees, and stopped beside the image. "You won't see it straight on," Annie said. "That was the point." Martin folded his arms. "Convenient." Annie turned the physical exhibit under the table lamp instead of pointing to the screen. "May I?" Judge Harlan leaned forward. "You may." Annie angled the page. "Here, lower right corner, under the chart. The line begins just past the left edge of the blank space and runs toward the margin. If you tilt the paper from the left, the gray pressure shows. The judge held out her hand. Eleanor brought the page to her. Judge Harlan angled it under her own lamp. The room waited. Her face did not change, but her pen stopped moving. "Counsel," she said, "I can see text." Martin stepped forward. "Your Honor, Caldwell does not dispute that some text may appear on certain printouts. We dispute that it has operative meaning." Annie looked at him. "Then why does it lead to Schedule 8? F." Martin ignored her. "Miss Carter, please read what you believe the text says." Annie closed her eyes for half a second, not for drama, but to see the page the way it had burned itself into her memory. "Strategic assumption of subsidiary obligations shall include all disclosed and undisclosed liabilities of foreign affiliates listed or incorporated by reference under Schedule 8, F, including overdue debt instruments, pending claims, convertible obligations, and personal guarantee exposure arising upon executive certification at closing." No one spoke. Judge Harlan looked at Eleanor. "Is that consistent with your enlarged extraction?" Eleanor stood. "Yes, Your Honor." Martin turned back to Annie. "Did someone provide you that language before today?" "No." "You memorized it?" "Yes. From a page you saw briefly. I saw it more than briefly after they brought me back upstairs. But first you noticed it during the meeting." "Yes. And your claim is that you understood its meaning immediately." "No." Martin paused. Annie continued before he could twist it. "I understood it was wrong immediately. I understood more when I saw Schedule 8. F." Judge Harlan's pen moved again. Martin's voice sharpened. "You keep saying wrong. Wrong according to whom?" "According to the words around it," Annie said. "The visible paragraph talks like a normal transition clause. Payroll, vendors, ordinary duties after closing. The hidden line changes the size of the bucket. It throws in foreign debt, pending claims, convertible obligations, then ties it to Mr. Whitmore's executive certification. That is not a shadow. That is a door." "A door," Martin repeated with contempt. "Yes," Annie said, "a door for debt." Richard looked down at the table. Eleanor did not. Martin moved closer, careful not to seem too aggressive but close enough to press. "Miss Carter, isn't it true that after this incident, Whitmore Global offered you paid consulting work?" "Yes." "So you benefited financially." "I got paid for hours I worked. After stopping a deal. After reading. You also received public attention." "I received public insults. Some praise as well. I didn't ask for either." "And when Future Door Scholarship Fund offered you tuition and housing, you rejected it." "Yes." "Why would a young woman in your position reject such an offer?" Eleanor stood. "Objection. Relevance." Martin turned. "Goes to motive. She rejects legitimate help, accepts compensation from Whitmore, and now serves as their witness." Judge Harlan considered it. "Limited answer." "Miss Carter?" Annie felt the room tighten again. She thought of the blue letterhead, the soft words, the leash on page 17. "I rejected it because the offer asked for my silence," she said. Martin shook his head. "That is your interpretation." "No," Annie said. "That is page 11. A flicker crossed Martin's face. Eleanor saw it. So did Judge Harlan. Martin closed the binder. "No further questions at this time." Eleanor stood. "Brief redirect, Your Honor." Judge Harlan nodded. Eleanor approached without papers. "Annie, why did you speak in that conference room?" Annie looked at page 8, then at Richard, then at Sam. "Because he was about to sign it. Even after he insulted you?" "Yes." "Why?" Annie's voice softened, but it did not weaken. "My mother died after people with cleaner desks than ours used small words to close every door. She taught me that if I see the trap and say nothing, then I become part of the trap." Eleanor let the answer stand. Judge Harlan looked at Annie for a long moment. "You may step down." Annie returned to her seat, her legs less steady than her voice had been. Sam did not touch her shoulder, but he leaned close enough for her to hear. "Still here?" he whispered. Across the room, Victor Caldwell no longer looked bored, and Martin Graves, for the first time since the hearing began, stopped smiling. Eleanor did not call Richard next. That surprised the room. Martin Graves had prepared for Richard Whitmore's temper. His pride, his public humiliation, his decision to suspend the signing. He had not prepared for Eleanor to walk past all of that and place 3 thin folders on the exhibit table. "Your Honor," Eleanor said, "Whitmore calls Priya Nair for the limited purpose of document authentication." Priya stood from the second row, smoothed her jacket, and took the witness chair with a nervous calm. She did not look at Martin. She looked at Judge Harlan. Eleanor handed her the first folder. "Miss Nair, did you participate in the emergency review of the Whitmore-Caldwell transaction documents?" "Yes." "Did you review the hidden text on page 8? "Yes." "Did you also review Schedule 8F and related entity records?" "Yes." Eleanor placed the second folder beside the first. "And did Annie Carter identify a recurring name during that review?" Priya glanced once toward Annie. "Yes." "Thomas Greer." Martin stood. "Objection. Hearsay and relevance." Judge Harlan looked over her glasses. "Miss Price? We are not offering Miss Carter's statement for the truth of the matter asserted. We are establishing the path of investigation and connecting authenticated documents." Judge Harlan nodded. "Limited purpose. Proceed." Eleanor opened the first folder. "What is this?" "Future Door Scholarship Fund materials sent to Annie Carter after the dispute became public." "Who appears as administrative counsel on the signature page?" Priya looked down. "Thomas Greer." Eleanor opened the second folder. "What is this?" "Registered contact information for Caldwell Rhine Holdings, one of the foreign affiliate entities listed in Schedule 8F. Nama? Thomas Greer." Eleanor opened the third folder. "And this?" Priya sat straighter. "Metadata and embedded drafting notes associated with Operational Reference File OR-17. A ripple went through Caldwell's table. Martin was on his feet again. "Your Honor, OR-17 has not been produced in complete form. Whitmore cannot authenticate a file it does not possess." Eleanor turned to him. "We don't possess the full file because Caldwell refused to produce it. What we do possess is the placeholder shell embedded in the final signing package, with metadata pointing to the same administrative author." Judge Harlan's pen stopped. "Mr. Graves, is there a reason OR-17 has not been produced?" Martin's voice stayed smooth, but his eyes had lost some of their ease. "The file is under internal reconciliation. It is not material to today's emergency issue." Judge Harlan said nothing for a moment. That silence did more work than an objection. Then she turned back to Eleanor. "Continue." Eleanor pointed to the third folder. "Miss Nair, whose name appears in the embedded administrative field?" Priya answered, "Thomas Greer." Victor Caldwell leaned back in his chair, but the movement was too controlled. Annie saw it because she had spent half her life reading things people hoped would pass as normal. Eleanor let the 3 documents sit apart on the table. "So we have Future Door, Caldwell Rhine Holdings, and OR-17's embedded shell. 3 separate documents. Same name." Priya nodded. "Yes." No further questions. Martin crossed quickly. "Miss Nair, Thomas Greer could be a common administrative agent, correct?" "It's possible. Delaware and offshore structures often use shared registered agents, correct?" "Yes." "So his name appearing in more than one place does not prove wrongdoing." "By itself, no." Martin smiled faintly. "Thank you." Priya did not leave it there. "But the same name appearing across a scholarship offered to a witness, a foreign debt affiliate, and a withheld reference file is not something I would ignore." Martin's smile faded. "That wasn't my question." "No," Judge Harlan said. "But it was responsive enough." Priya stepped down. Eleanor then stood still for a beat, letting the room settle around the 3 folders. Annie watched Martin Graves whisper to Caldwell. Caldwell did not whisper back. His eyes stayed on the folders. "Your Honor," Eleanor said, "we request an order compelling immediate production of OR-17, including native files, metadata, and all communications concerning its creation, modification, and removal from the signing binder." Martin shook his head. "Overbroad. Targeted," Eleanor said. "Premature. Necessary. Fishing expedition." Eleanor looked at page 8 on the exhibit screen. "The fish is already on the table." A sound moved through Whitmore's side before people caught themselves. Judge Harlan did not smile, but her pen moved. "Mr. Graves, I will hear your response." Martin stepped forward. Your Honor, Caldwell has been attempting to complete a commercial transaction in good faith. Whitmore suffered a boardroom embarrassment, reacted under pressure, and now seeks to turn ordinary document management into conspiracy. They rely on a cleaning worker's interpretation, a scholarship offer from an independent foundation, and speculative connections through an administrative name. This is not evidence of fraud. It is a pile of assumptions. Annie felt the phrase cleaning worker land differently this time. Martin used it like a broom handle, but it no longer reached her the same way. Judge Harlan turned to Eleanor. Response. Eleanor rose. Caldwell calls page 8 an artifact, but the hidden text is selectable in the PDF. Caldwell says the clause is non-operative, but it cross-references Schedule 8, F. Caldwell says OR 17 is non-material, then unavailable, then under reconciliation. Caldwell says future DOOR is independent, but its administrative counsel appears in the same chain as a Caldwell affiliate and the withheld reference file. At some point, Your Honor, coincidence stops being an explanation and becomes a strategy. Richard sat very still. Annie looked at the 3 folders and thought of her mother's old line, paper remembers, people deny. Judge Harlan turned toward Caldwell's table. Mr. Caldwell. Victor Caldwell lifted his head. Yes, Your Honor. Does Thomas Greer act directly or indirectly on behalf of Caldwell International Partners, any Caldwell-controlled affiliate, or any entity participating in this transaction? Martin stood. Your Honor, Mr. Caldwell is not on the witness stand. No, Judge Harlan said. He is a party representative seeking emergency relief in a proceeding where his company has withheld a referenced file. He may answer or decline, and I will draw whatever procedural inference I deem appropriate. The room tightened. Caldwell gave a composed smile. Your Honor, Caldwell International works with many administrative professionals across jurisdictions. I cannot speak to every filing name without review. Judge Harlan did not blink. That was not my question. Caldwell's smile thinned. I would need counsel to advise. Martin leaned close and whispered. Caldwell listened, his face hardening a fraction. Judge Harlan waited. Finally, Caldwell said, on advice of counsel, I decline to answer that question at this time. The court reporter's keys clicked softly. Annie looked at Caldwell. The man who had called her a little beggar girl now sat silent in front of a simple question. Eleanor let the silence stretch. Then she said, Your Honor, Whitmore renews its request. Judge Harlan nodded once. Granted in part. Caldwell will produce OR 17 inches native format, with metadata, by 5 p.m. today. Caldwell will also preserve all communications involving page 8, Schedule 8F, Thomas Greer, and future DOOR Scholarship Fund. Failure to comply will affect any request for emergency relief. Martin objected for the record. Judge Harlan allowed him to make the record and then overruled him. Richard exhaled for the first time in what felt like several minutes. Sam leaned back in his chair, eyes on Annie, pride held carefully behind his calm face. But Eleanor was not finished. Your Honor, one more matter. We request that Caldwell and its agents be ordered not to contact Annie Carter directly. Martin's tone sharpened. There is no evidence Caldwell contacted her. Eleanor held up the future DOOR packet. There is enough evidence to stop it from happening again. Judge Harlan looked toward Annie, not with pity, but with the plain attention of someone weighing a fact. Granted pending further order, she said. Annie's hands loosened in her lap. For the first time in days, a room with expensive furniture had placed a rule around her instead of a target on her. Martin returned to his seat. Caldwell did not look at him. He looked at Annie. Not long. Just enough. This time, Annie did not look away. The hearing adjourned shortly after noon. No final victory. No sweeping speech. Just orders, deadlines, preservation, production. It was the language of procedure, but Annie understood what had happened. Caldwell had not been defeated. He had been forced to open a door he had spent days holding shut. Outside the hearing room, reporters surged at the hallway ropes. Mr. Whitmore, are you accusing Caldwell of fraud? Miss Carter, did you really discover hidden text? Mr. Caldwell, who is Thomas Greer? Caldwell walked past without answering. Martin followed, phone already at his ear. Richard stopped just long enough to face the nearest cameras. We suspended the signing because the document required review, he said. Today's order confirms that review was necessary. A reporter called. And Annie Carter? Richard turned slightly, making room for her name without pulling her in front of the cameras. Miss Carter told the truth about a page many people had failed to read. That remains the central fact. He walked on. Annie moved beside Sam through the side exit Eleanor had arranged. Her legs felt weak now, that no one was questioning her. In the service hallway of the hotel, away from cameras, she stopped and leaned one hand against the wall. Sam waited. After a moment, she said, "He wouldn't answer." "No," Sam said. "He wouldn't." "That means something?" "It means the question found a sore tooth." Annie let out a breath that almost shook. "I thought I'd feel better." Sam nodded. "You will, later. Right now your body still thinks you're in the chair." Eleanor came through the door carrying the folders, with Richard behind her. "Annie," she said, "you did well." Annie looked at the folders. "Did we win?" Eleanor's answer was honest. "We got the door open." Richard looked toward the hallway where Caldwell had gone, and now we see what he hid behind it. Annie touched the notebook in her pocket. She thought of page 8, OR 17, Thomas Greer, future door, and every clean sentence built to carry a dirty thing. Then she said, "Read it the moment it comes." OR 17 arrived at 4:47 p.m. It came with a short email from Martin Graves that said Caldwell was producing the file, without waiver, under protest, and without admission of relevance. Eleanor read that line aloud, then looked at Annie. "That means they hate what's inside." Annie sat forward. "Open it." Richard stood behind Eleanor's chair. Sam had returned from the hotel with her, refusing to go home until he knew what OR 17 was. June had come up with coffee and a bag of grocery store cookies because, as she put it, if villains work late, decent people need sugar. The file opened on the screen. At first, it looked harmless. A table of foreign subsidiaries, loan instruments, maturity dates, and cross-border support obligations. Then Priya expanded the hidden tabs. Mark pulled the metadata. Eleanor compared the entity names to Schedule 8F. Annie did what she had done from the beginning. She read the parts that seemed too clean. "There," she said. Everyone looked. Annie pointed to a column labeled Contingent Executive Trigger. "That's the same phrase they buried in page 8, just dressed up." Eleanor leaned in. "Scroll right." Priya scrolled. A second table appeared, protected but not locked. At the bottom sat 3 linked entities: Caldwell Rhine Holdings, Astor Overseas, and Northbridge Medical Finance. Beside each was a guarantee pathway that activated upon executive certification at closing. Richard read the numbers without speaking. $612 million in debt exposure. Pending claims not included. Currency adjustment not included. Late penalties not included. June broke the silence. "That is not a trap. That is a whole bear pit." Sam nodded once. With carpet over it, Mark clicked into the revision history. Thomas Greer again. Eleanor's voice sharpened. "Where?" "Last modified by T. Greer, then reviewed by MG Final." Richard turned away from the screen for 1 second, both hands at his waist. Martin Graves. Priya opened the comment thread embedded in the working file. Most comments had been stripped, but one remained attached to the hidden clause layer. "Ensure visible draft remains clean. Risk transfer language to remain under chart layer pending final print package." No one moved. Annie felt her mother's notebook against her side and thought, "Paper remembers. People deny." Eleanor printed the page, marked it, scanned it, and sent it to Judge Harlan within 12 minutes. By 6:30, Caldwell had withdrawn its request for emergency enforcement. By 8, Victor Caldwell's team offered to dismiss the $150 million claim without payment if both sides agreed to mutual confidentiality. Richard read the email once and handed it to Eleanor. "No." Eleanor looked pleased. "Full dismissal. No confidentiality covering misconduct. Preservation stays. Referral rights stay. Send it." The final order came 2 days later. Caldwell's emergency claim was denied. Whitmore had acted in good faith by suspending the signing. OR 17, page 8, Schedule 8F, and the Greer-linked scholarship materials raised sufficient concern to justify termination of negotiations. Judge Harlan did not use the word fraud as a final finding. But she used another phrase Caldwell liked even less. Evidence of intentional concealment. The market did what markets do. It fell, rose, argued with itself, then found a new story. Regulators requested documents. Two smaller companies that had once dealt with Caldwell contacted Eleanor's office. Martin Graves took leave from his firm. Victor Caldwell stopped appearing on television. But none of that was the moment Annie remembered most. The moment came 1 week after the order, in the lobby of Harrington and Vale, where Richard Whitmore asked everyone to gather again. This time, Annie did not stand beside the security desk. She stood beside Sam and June near the center, wearing the same denim jacket over a clean white blouse. She had bought neither to impress anyone. The jacket still had pale cuffs from old bleach stains. She kept it because the room had to remember the girl it had tried to laugh out of itself. Richard stood a few feet away with a folder in his hand. No podium, no lawyers arranged behind him. Eleanor stood off to the side, arms folded, watching like a woman ready to correct the record if anyone breathed wrong. Richard looked at the employees first. Lawyers, assistants, cleaners, guards, reception staff, clerks, messengers, accountants, people with offices and people with keys to offices they would never use. I have signed many things in my life, he said. Some made me money. Some cost me sleep. Last week, I almost signed one that would have cost me more than money. It would have cost this company its judgment, its integrity, and perhaps its future. He turned to Annie. Annie Carter stopped that. A few people began to clap, but he raised a hand. Not yet. Applause is easy. Change is harder. The clapping stopped. Richard opened the folder. Effective today, Annie Carter will join Whitmore Global's contract review training program as a paid analyst trainee. Not as charity, not as a symbol, as work. She will be evaluated by the same standard as anyone else, and I suspect that will make some people nervous. June murmured, "It should." A few people heard her and smiled. Richard continued, "Samuel Ellis will receive full medical support for his leg, paid by Whitmore Global, and his post will be adjusted with no reduction in pay." He trusted Annie before anyone else in this building did. That was judgment. Sam looked down, uncomfortable with praise in public. Annie bumped his sleeve lightly with hers. Richard's voice lowered. "We are also establishing the Martha Carter Legal Literacy Fund." Annie's breath caught. Richard looked at her, then at the room. Martha Carter was Annie's mother. She was a legal secretary. She taught her daughter to read what others hope people will skip. This fund will provide free document review clinics for workers, tenants, patients, and families who need help understanding what they are asked to sign. Annie blinked hard once. June took her hand without asking. Annie let her. Richard looked back at the crowd. No person should need $1 million mistake in a conference room before the world believes they can read. That sentence stayed in the lobby. Afterward, people came up to Annie carefully. Some thanked her. Some apologized. Some did both badly. Annie accepted what she could and let the rest pass. The young attorney who had laughed on the first day stood in front of her with red ears. "I'm still sorry," he said. Annie looked at him. "Good. Stay sorry long enough to change." He nodded. "I'll try. Try on paper," she said. "Paper lasts longer." A month later, a small oak table was placed near the service entrance, not far from Sam's desk. It had 2 chairs, a lamp, pens, legal pads, and a brass plaque set into the front edge. For those who were never supposed to read the fine print, June called it Annie's table, though Annie kept saying it was not hers. "It has your attitude," June said. Close enough. On Thursday evenings, after her training hours ended, Annie sat there with volunteers from Eleanor's team. At first, only employees came. A night cleaner with a lease renewal, a mailroom worker with a car loan, a receptionist helping her aunt understand a medical bill. Then people brought cousins, neighbors, church friends. Sam made a sign-in sheet. June brought coffee. Eleanor came whenever she could, and pretended not to enjoy explaining late fees to landlords over the phone. Richard stopped by one evening near closing. Annie was reviewing a rental agreement with a cafeteria worker. So he waited. That alone would have been impossible a month earlier. When the worker left, Richard placed a slim envelope on the table. "What's that?" Annie asked. "Your first performance review. I've been here 3 weeks. Eleanor said you'd object if it was late." Annie opened it. The review was plain. Strengths: exceptional issue spotting, document pattern recognition, courage under pressure. Development areas: formal legal terminology, pacing, accepting meal breaks. Annie looked up. Meal breaks? Richard's mouth moved toward a smile. June contributed. Annie folded the paper carefully. It's fair. That was the idea. He started to leave, then stopped. Miss Carter? She looked up. I read your mother's notebook. Annie's hand went still. All of it? She asked. All of it. And? Richard took a moment. She should have had a name on a door. Annie looked at the brass plaque, then at the table, then at him. Now she does. Richard nodded once and left without adding anything. He had learned, finally, that not every quiet moment needed his voice. 1 year later, Annie still kept the denim jacket on the back of her chair. She had passed her GED. She had started evening classes. Her hair was often pulled back with a pencil stuck through it, because Eleanor said that was not professional, and Annie said neither was hiding debt under a chart. Sam's leg had improved after surgery, though he claimed the physical therapist was meaner than basic training. June still carried food in containers and acted offended when people thanked her. The table by the service entrance stayed busy. One cold Thursday, a girl from the cafeteria staff brought Annie a lease and asked why the important words were always so small. Annie opened her mother's notebook, the spine now repaired with black tape. She smiled, not because the question was simple, but because the answer had survived. Because they hope you won't read them, she said, but we read. Then she pulled the lamp closer, turned the first page, and began. The lesson of Annie Carter's story is that a person's worth should never be measured by their clothes, job, race, or place in a room. Sometimes the truth comes from the person everyone else ignores. Annie did not save the deal because she had power, money, or a title. She saved it because she paid attention, remembered what her mother taught her, and had the courage to speak when silence would have been easier. The story reminds us that respect should come before judgment, that kindness is not weakness, and that justice often begins when one overlooked person refuses to let a lie stay hidden. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.